I need to read this whole thing or just open
No,
it?
just
Open it?
announce
Okay,
that.
so, Greg and
Okay.
Okay.
Patrick.
Switch over.
Pat and Patrick.
Okay,
And-
all set.
Okay, thank you. All right, welcome to the Hamilton Planning Board Tuesday, September 21st meeting. On our agenda tonight is continuation of the Senior Housing Special Permit public hearings for the application of Chabaco Capital Partners LLC at 133 Essex Street, and board business to discuss upcoming schedule, agenda items, possible special town meeting articles, and review and approve meeting minutes. We're all in masks tonight, and we have a request that we remain so throughout the meeting. So with masks on, it's very important that all of us who are speaking speak clearly, loudly, and into the microphone so that other members of the board can hear, as well as those who are participating via Zoom. So with that, I'm going to open it up. Patrick, do you have any opening remarks?
Yes, thank you, Rick. Few things are becoming very clear to us. Number one, we needed some help with some Zoom experts. Pat Norton has been helping us a great deal. But about a week ago, the town manager has asked Bill Melville and Greg Ahmed to work with us. Greg and Bill are both here tonight helping us to sort out details. This is one of those evolving technologies that sometimes are evading some of us, but we're happy to have their help, and we're hoping for a much more productive discussion. The sound issue that we had last time was, in fact, the sound producer is part of the projector, oddly enough. So we've gotten that dealt with, so happy for that. A couple of things have become apparent to us that we need to be managing our meetings a little bit more focused. To that effect, what we do want to do is pick the topics ahead of time that we want our next meeting to focus on. You'll notice in some of the emails back and forth that we have a number of items that we didn't finish up on last time. One of them was regarding overall zoning decisions relative to a senior housing project. Those kinds of inherent requirements that are part of that zoning that the board needs to respond to. Another focus area for tonight is regarding the Groundwater Protection Overlay District. And then the third general topic is regarding inclusionary housing. Both the number of units and the value of the units we're going to work through with the board. Hereafter, what we'd like to be able to do is at the close of our discussion on the project at each meeting, we'll decide which items that the applicant and we want to discuss at the following meeting. That being said, we need to make sure that we get our information from the applicant and commenters 1 week ahead of the scheduled continued hearing. It's impossible to obtain these kinds of emails and transmittals and all manner of documentation that comes to you and expect the board to be able to digest them intellectually and academically, in just a matter of few hours. So I'm going to ask that if individuals, the developer, others want to focus on particular areas of the project, that we talk about that ahead of time, form the following agenda, and then focus on those issues rather than going 360 degrees. That, sometimes the comments have been focusing that way. So I think this is going to be a lot more productive for the public, for the board, and certainly for the applicant as well. So I appreciate everyone's indulgence in pursuing those goals. And at that, I'll turn it over.
Okay, so I believe then we will turn it over to the applicant's attorney, Jill Mann, to lead us through the topics that you've described. And we will connect her shortly, so please be patient with us.
Good evening. I'm trying to, here we go. I can start my video for you.
You're with us, Jill.
Good evening. I hope everyone's doing well. I just wanted to.
Could you hold on a second, Jill? Can we get a higher level of volume from this?
Try the PA.
We're going to turn up the volume, Jill, so we can hear you.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah, that's better.
Go ahead, Jill.
I just wanted to go over really the presence of the board members. So when I looked initially when we were talking, I see that Mr. Wheaton has joined the board, and I just want to confirm that Mr. Wheaton did in fact look at the minutes from the prior hearing and signed or will sign that Mullen affidavit saying he did review and is able to continue to be a board member on this matter.
I did. I sent the Mullen report into the town hall.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I
Bill,
appreciate that, Mr. Wheaton.
Bill did
and then-
complete that, Jill. He did send it to me. I made sure that the clerk has it as well, so it's been filed with the town.
Perfect, thank you. And then I just want to confirm that Mr. Boroff and Mr. Dahlquist, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, are both absent this evening and aren't going to be joining us.
Mr. Boroff doesn't appear to be here this evening. Mr. Dahlquist left a few moments ago, told me he was ill, but he would be joining us at home remotely.
Oh, okay, great, okay. Remote. And we don't know if Mr. Boroff is, but I can just track and then we can have him sign a Mullen at the next meeting. Okay, I just like to keep my notes for this. I apologize for the administrative burden. Would it be possible, Mr. Mitchell, if I could share my screen?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I think the host just has to enable screen sharing.
Yeah, she's on it.
As a panelist, she'll be able to.
Yeah, she's already a panelist.
Sorry, Jill, you should be able to share.
Nah, it still says host disabled participants sharing.
Oh, my bad.
Here we go. Perfect. Thank you very much. So I'm just going to, I think the best place to start, right, is always at the beginning. So basically, good evening, Jill Mann here on behalf of Chibacaville Capital Partners, the proponent in connection with this application. I think everybody knows the development team. Granite Engineering and Brenton Cole and Jeff Merritt are on the line if there's any questions. Our surveyor and wetland scientist, William Spargus and Greg Hockmuth, are not here because we really aren't going to discuss any of those issues. The landscape architect is not present, but can be if there's ever a question, as well as the architect. And also the owner is, I believe, on the line, as are Julia and Larry. The purpose of this evening's meeting, and this is something that we had discussed earlier with Mr. Ruffett, is to go over the project eligibility, compliance, and then density, to discuss the applicability of the GPOD to resolve that issue, hopefully with finality, and then also to discuss inclusionary zoning. What I thought may be instrumental, though, at this point, is kind of to give everybody just a broad stroke, right, of what are we trying to accomplish? I really think it's important to kind of frame the issue. And the reason I'm saying that is because I feel, and I think Mr. Ruffett touched upon it, I feel as though there's sometimes, these strains of conversation, and it's always good to kind of focus and try to get through things in a very complicated project, because we understand that this land is sensitive and is very important, in we are trying to make very considerate, meaningful changes to our plan, and when we develop the plan, we are as well. I think we were mindful of the purposes for senior housing, and that's why I wanted to share it on my screen.
Jill, can you hold on 1 second? We've lost video,
Oh, I'm sorry.
so I don't know if that's on our end or your end.
I can see where the Hamilton Zoom thing is not there, but it looks like it's still being shown to your audience.
Yeah, but not to us.
I know, I don't understand that.
Well, we've got our technical team working on this.
So it's there. Oh, we're sharing it, yeah, projector.
Projector's off, yeah.
Evidently, the projector decided to take a nap.
When you do the hybrid, it makes it complicated for some reason.
Oh, tell us about
I've
it.
seen that happen many times, actually.
Yeah, hold on, I think you're coming back. Now we have the input screen, but we don't have a picture, so hold on, we're still working on that.
No worries.
Sorry for the interruption.
No, it's not an issue at all, Mr. Mitchell. Thank you.
I believe that's being impacted because she's showing her screen. So when you made the change.
So that wasn't an issue previously. Is there a different input we need to go for the projector?
Oh, hold on.
Ah,
Here we go.
here we go. We had a loose connect.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a loose connection. All right, we are back again. So proceed, Jill.
We're in action. Thank you very much. So what I wanted to do is just kind of go over, what was our intention and what were we thinking when we came to this town to develop this particular project. As you know, Mr. Smith and Ms. Dickinson have already been a participant in some community growth. They actually developed Canterbrook, and they're the developers with regard to that project, which I think everybody can attest it has turned out to be a lovely development with a lot of very nice people who've come to town. So we're very mindful of the purposes. So what is it? To permit the development of, all of types of housing for elderly persons. And pursuant to your zoning and your senior bylaw, that's people who are 55 years old and older, basically empty nesters. One of the other purposes of the senior bylaw are to allow flexibility in land use, to stop conventional, for lack of a better term, mansionization. And that's what goes on a lot when you have very, 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 very large homes sprawled over parcels of land where it's basically the entire parcel is rendered treeless. The other thing is to try and protect natural features, encourage environmental protection, try to encourage open space, to encourage smart growth, which smart growth is really either the density. So what do we need to do today to consolidate development, which is what senior housing allows us to do, to basically bring in a large parcel of land and develop only a small portion of it so that the balance of the land can be enjoyed by the entire community. It's also important, especially with senior housing, to be mindful of the fact that it provides a fiscal benefit. And what is that fiscal benefit? It is a tremendous tax base There is absolutely no burden because everything is privately owned. The stormwater is privately owned. The roadways are privately owned. The trails that go back are going to be maintained by the community. And because it's senior housing, because there are no young people permitted, it is truly dedicated to older people. There's no burden on the school, which means you have, a lot of revenue that is otherwise not going to be tapped for school-based budgets, or school budgets, excuse me. And it is to protect the rural feel of Hamilton. And we've tried to do that. We've tried to protect it by maintaining the bucolic view, by keeping the farmland, keeping it open. That's our goal. The other thing we've been able to do is try to really bring in where we're going to put our entrance. Clearly, you have to enter a property. I mean, it's not going to be without any visual impact. You have to enter, but it is better than having multiple entrances, a single entrance, a single viewpoint, a single impact. And I think we've been mindful of those purposes. And I want to remind the public that this land will be developed. I mean, it's a private ownership, and they have had it out there for sale. We believe that our proposal is the best proposal for all of the purposes set forth in the senior housing, and because it provides this town with a community that it can be proud of, and that it can be consolidated and represent all of these purposes that were enacted by town meeting, and also a part of your master plan, obviously. As part of our submittal, we actually showed you a conventional plan. Under many, many bylaws, we're required to provide this plan. In Hamilton, you aren't, but we provided it just to show you, look, this isn't what we want to do, but this is something that's eligible to be done, by the way, by right, because a subdivision, most people don't know this, but a subdivision is a by right plan. If you meet all of the provisions of subdivision control, it cannot be denied. And here is the plan. And I am mindful of the fact that this particular plan shows crossings of wetlands. But I have to also remind people that wetland crossings are permitted as limited projects in large housing developments. So while we believe that is not the best approach, our project was intentionally created to be completely outside of your buffer, except for one area of intrusion that's a temporary intrusion, and then a part of a stormwater basin that has some grading, and then a wood road. But the entire development area, I mean, all of these homes, all of the infrastructure for the roadway is located outside of the wetlands. And in fact, we are even doing directional drilling, which is a process whereby we go outside the buffer for a wetland to drill under a wetland so we can put in our septic system, which, by the way, has been approved by DEP many times and deemed not to be an impact to the wetland. And we're proceeding with the Conservation Commission on that. But I just want to say that the development we have is not what's in front of you, but a very much more mindful project that takes into consideration all of your purposes as set forth in your senior housing bylaw and your master plan. This particular proposal would result in, a number of driveway entrances, because the two lots you see here shown on the plan, those are individual lots that may enter in off of Essex and may enter in off of roadway A. It's up to the homeowner to make that decision. But you can see that we have a lot 6, a lot 5, a lot 4. They can enter off of Chabaco, or they can enter in off of roadway D. Excuse me, I apologize. My voice is failing me. So I just wanted to be able to show you what the conventional plan is. And obviously, we all know that a number of different developers have come and looked at a conventional plan. Very few people are really opting for the senior plan. That just happens to be what Larry and Julia specialize in. I mean, in the last option and the least desirable, which we are proposing, I don't even show you, is a 40B development. Those would be Mr. and Ms. Rich and her brother, Mr. Rich, their only options with regard to development after a conventional plan. And again, I show you this because I think it's important to just understand that we are trying to do this in the most mindful fashion we possibly can. So let's look at, So what I'd like to do is just go over the overview of the plan, which I basically just did. I just showed you, a complete vision. So just really fast, because I just like to always remind the board, it's 66 acres of land, it's in the R1B district, and it has about 16 acres of wetland. We already talked about the fact we're creating a senior housing. We already talked about the fact that we're preserving farmland, and we're also preserving, in addition to the 9.4 acres of farmland, we're preserving more than 40 acres of open space that will be used to support a trail system. Okay, I'm going too fast. So now the eligibility aspects of the project are basically something we would like to discuss tonight. What I'm going to do is actually share with you here we go. So when you're looking at the eligibility, I'm just going to go through this provision, I should. So when you're looking at eligibility, when we go through all of the provisions for what really is appropriate in senior housing, we have to be located in one of the residential districts, which we are. We're in the R1B. So we know we're eligible from that perspective. You have to be outside like a half a mile radius from all the other developments. We looked at that before. We're more than a mile outside, more than 2 miles outside or beyond the radius of Patton Ridge and Canterbrook. So we comply with that aspect. We know that the project's going to be age restricted because that's what we're telling you. We're going to provide you with condo documents that evidence that. We know that we comply with all of the density requirements because I'm going to go through and show you what the development acres are and how that proceeds. So basically, we need, sorry about that. We need to get through what is a developable acre. People are throwing out what developable acres are. It is so clear. We have 66 acres of land, 16 of which are wetland. That leaves us with 50 acres of developable land. That's what it is. Developable acres are 50. End. Now, we keep going back and forth about GPOD and its applicability. It does not apply, and I'm going to explain why, but I want to make certain that everybody understands that regardless of whether it does apply or it doesn't apply, the basic density is 50 units. Even if GPOD, the development area, were in GPOD, we can do everything we're doing. There's nothing we cannot do and nothing that requires a special permit. Nothing. I simply wanted to make sure that people understood that the entire development area is not in the GPOD. By the way, Patton Ridge and Canterbrook both are located entirely within the GPOD. All that required was an increase in the number of, or decrease really, in the number of lots that you could have. So for example, in the R1B zoning district, which is what we are in, which is what this particular proposal is located, the district, you can have 2 units for every developable acre. Again, the reason is because the project and the town understood that this density and all of the elements of give back to the town required increase in density to be able to provide for support for the project because it's not affordable without that. So when you look at it, whether we are in GPOD or not, it's 50 base units. And the reason for that is the number of units is limited to 50 units in any single development. That's what your bylaw says. So no matter what my density is, no matter what my base density result is, I can only develop 50 units. So, for example, if we are going to be limited in any way, even by GPOD, that means for every 50, for the 50 developable acres, we are entitled to 1 base density. This isn't, and by the way, I want the public to understand and the board members too, because I know this is the first senior housing project for many of you. All that means is it's the base housing density. You're not approving 50 units. You simply, it's by the bylaw. It can't be more clear. It is simply reading the bylaw. So under the bylaw, even if we are in the GPOD, based on the amount of area, we're entitled to 50 units. Now, if we are not in the GPOD, we're entitled to anywhere between 88 and 100 units, But again, it's an irrelevant or a moot point because we can only have 50. So this is something I would like to just get through tonight, to be able to have the board discuss the base density and just finalize it and say, yes, you're eligible. Yes, you have 50 units, and no, you are not subject to any of the requirements of the GPOD, but also make a finding that even if you were, there is nothing within the GPOD provisions that limit or deny or control what we are doing as far as the plans show. So that's the density. All I did was, I wanted to pull this out. When we go back to a conversation about GPOD, we can have this. I just wanted to show you. What is shown in the green is basically the farmland that has always been used. And this is the limit of the farmland. It's pursuant to a lease agreement. We just don't have the internal dimensions. We do have them because when we subject this particular portion of the property to the lease with the farmer, the new plan does have the dimensions. But I show you this only for point of reference. The farmland has 9.4 acres in total, about 3.2 are wet, 6.2 acres are actively farmed. So that's a set aside, that's what it's going to be. And then the balance of the property consists of pure open space that isn't farmed, but will be open for trails. But regardless, we will subject the farmland to the conservation restriction. And the reason for that is if the farmland ever ceases to be farmland, then it automatically reverts to passive recreation under the CR. So that's basically to give comfort to the town and to the abutters that this land is true conservation land. Because I think there's sometimes an issue. People think things are conservation land because there's wetland behind their homes. This is a conservation restriction that is endorsed by the Executive Office Environmental, I can't even say the whole thing, Secretary of the Environment, and they actually signed this plan and the CR along with the town, the Conservation Commission, and the owner of the property. Mr. Mitchell, would it be okay if I just keep going? Do you want me to stop at any point or just continue the presentation, then go back to the individual topics?
Yeah, just hold on one second and see if the board has any questions about the GPOD and its applicability here.
Sure, and that's what this is. Thank you.
Does the board have any questions?
I did have one question. Under the GPOD, section 9.1.9, uses and activities requiring a special permit. Item number 3 provides that any use that will render impervious more than 15% or 2,500 square feet of any lot, whichever is greater. Just as a question, have you done that calculation?
Yes, Ms. Crouch, we actually have, and Brent Cole and Jeff Merritt are on the line, and we actually did do that calculation, and I believe it's on the front sheet of our plan. If I would ask, it'll take me time to get everything loaded up. Is it possible for the controller to actually allow conversation by Granite Engineering, Jeff Merritt, and Brent Cole?
We can try and do that. Give us a second.
No, I can look it up too. I just didn't have that at my fingertips. I'm going to try and grab it in the top because I know I have it here.
We're working on plugging in the two.
Should be able to speak.
Okay, your consultant should be able to speak.
Great. Hey guys, Jeff and Brent. I think you just have to unmute yourselves. There you go. Hi guys. So the question was, Brent, I believe you and I did this calculation. We wanted to confirm that no matter what, if there was some applicability, we just wanted to be under the limit with regard to the GPOD, and that 15% of the area of the property cannot be rendered impervious. Can you address that, please?
Yes, good evening, folks. For the record, my name is Brent Cole from Granite Engineering. We do have that calculation. I don't have the number off the top of my head, and it's actually not on the plan. But we'll work while Jill continues her presentation to get you that number, but we are under the 15% threshold.
Okay. Well, I thought we had put it on our plan, and maybe what I had done was put it in my narrative, and I could probably pull that up, but it'll take me forever to try and get it. And Ms. Crouch, we are going to get back to you with that information. Jeff and Brent will pull it up and give it to you in the next few minutes, if it's okay to proceed, or if you have more questions, we'd love to answer them.
No, that's fine. Whenever you can do the calculation, and if you have done it and you have determined that it's less than 15%, I can accept your word on that, but I think it may behoove you to actually provide the information.
I would love to present that to you this evening, and we did do the calculation, but we are going to give you that number.
And the other question I had, and it may not be one that you can answer, but Dave Thompson submitted a
Yes.
memo to the board, and it was circulated. Have you seen that?
I did. I thought it was actually a very good memo, and we did review all of it, and basically are in the process of responding to a lot of it, because that's what our directive is under the actual bylaw. So we have hired the company that you have heard from, Main Blast and Drilling, for the ledge removal. And since that's what a big component of all this is, we actually then hired a hydrologist to review that report and confirm that our process will in fact be mindful of the entire area, mindful of people's wells, mindful of people's homes, make sure
Excuse
that
me,
there's no
you're
contamination
actually-
of the water, review the process. So we are going to present that at the next hearing, but we did review his list of comments. They were provided somewhere back in August, I believe.
Right, and I wasn't referring to that part of his memorandum. It was his calculation based on the 80,000 square feet, and his conclusion that you couldn't build 50 units, you could only build 36 units?
Yes, so what that was, Ms. Crouch, was he did a very good job. He was estimating what the conventional plan would be, not what the senior housing plan would be. So I can't really bring that up, but he was less conservative than we were when we developed this plan. So what Mr. Thompson was talking about is what could be done in a conventional sense is 36. So what the GP, that's what he meant. He wasn't talking about senior housing in the developable acres.
Did you have a comment, Patrick?
Yeah, I know that Dave Thompson is actually one of the attendees tonight.
Can we enable him to speak? Hold on one second while we look up his name and connect.
I can bring up his memo too. Oh, it was in June. Huh.
Are the other board members familiar with Dave Thompson's memo?
Yeah, I did read it.
Yeah, I have, Ms. Crouch, if you'd like, I can go. Oh, there he is. I see him.
All right. Do we have Dave Thompson?
Yep, I see him on the screen, but Mr. Thompson, you're muted.
How's that?
You're perfect now. Thank you.
You look beautiful,
Okay,
Dave.
welcome. Rick?
Go
what do you
ahead.
want? What can I do for you?
So I think Ms. Crouch had a question about your memo. I leave it to you, Ms. Crouch. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I did. I was wondering how the applicant squared your conclusion that 36 units would be permitted on this site, and whether you were drawing that conclusion with the senior housing bylaw in mind or some other type of development.
When I went through this, I looked at it first, and it was 66 acres, which I considered to be one lot. The applicant had identified 24 acres as within the GPOD. I did the higher math on that and determined that that was more than 33% of the lot, and therefore GPOD applies. Within the GPOD, the maximum density is 80,000 square foot per dwelling unit. So I divided 80,000 square feet into 66.2 acres and came up with whatever the number was that I came up with, 30-something units.
36 units.
36 dwelling units. So that is how I came up with the 36, and based on the assumption that the entire lot was subject to GPOD. I believe that to be the case, but since it is senior housing, under Title V, it's treated differently in terms of discharge effluent. Under Title V, senior housing, a maximum 2 bedrooms per unit. The state gives you a design criteria of 150 gallons per day, which is a real deal. It generates a low flow from a development, and I think for the 50 units that was proposed for senior housing, using the rate that's specified by the Title V, 150 gallons per day, you come up with a total effluent of 7,500 gallons per day of flow, as compared to what might be generated from 36 units of regular housing, say 3-bedroom units at 110 gallons per day per bedroom. You would generate about 11,000, as I recall, gallons per day design flow. So in my opinion, if this is interpreted to not be under the jurisdiction of GPOD, and it remains in the area of senior housing, complying with that portion of Title V, that's fine with me. And I think that meets the intent of the Groundwater Protection Overlay District, which was to reduce the amount of effluent per acre. And clearly that's accomplished here under senior housing, because the state Title V gives you a real deal on a design effluent. So I'm not going to make a big deal out of it about whether or not this is within the GPOD or not. My principal concern is the portion of the lot which is mapped in the GPOD shows on the town's mapping drawings as a recharge area. It likely recharges Beck Pond, and the proposed on-site disposal system is immediately adjacent to that area. My concern is that we're going to dump 7,500 gallons per day into that area, so 365 days of the year. And the town's mapping shows that that's a recharge area to Beck's Pond. Beck's Pond recharges Round Pond. Round Pond provides water supply for Manchester. Beck's Pond is a potential future water resource for the town of Hamilton. I don't want to take any chances of polluting the water supply in any of those ponds that are down through there. So my concern is that we address the simple fact that we're going to build a septic system on the edge of a zone which is mapped as a recharge area. I think we should determine whether or not that is in fact a recharge area by doing some borings in there and seeing if we do have a significant thickness of clean sands and gravels, which would be consistent with a recharge area. and what the groundwater gradient is. Does it head to Beck's Pond? And if it does, there are modeling programs that can address this and determine whether or not dumping all of this raw sewage upstream of the recharge area can potentially impact Beck's Pond. I think also a prudent approach to this would be to install some monitoring wells in that area to determine if there is sewage contamination making its way towards the pond before it gets there. Just to be conservative, be an early warning system. So
Well, thank you.
basically, those are my thoughts on it.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I mean, I think we might have gotten a little ahead of ourselves on some of those other issues, but you certainly addressed the fact that 50 units do not upset you, and in a sense, you highlighted that the senior housing bylaw and the GPOD could be harmonized. If you look at their respective purposes, they are not antithetical to one another. So with respect to the issue that we're discussing right now, whether potentially 50 units could be built on site is not something that troubles you.
Can I ask a question, Dave?
I think I got the gist of it, Rick. I don't think the applicant's interpretation and arguments that I've heard on the meeting before this one and this one as well doesn't make sense to me. I think it's simple math that we have a 66-acre lot and GPOD requires 80,000 square foot per dwelling unit. I mean, the math is pretty simple. It comes out not a third of a lot, it's 36%, so it's in the GPOD. But as I said, the big picture here is the GPOD intent and purpose was to dilute the pollution that's discharged to the ground to a level which is determined by that 80,000 square foot per dwelling unit. Because we're building something on the site here that isn't going to generate that amount of waste, we are in fact accomplishing that by the restrictions that already are embedded in Title V and the fact that this is going to be a senior housing development. And so on that basis, I think it's a fight that is rather academic.
Can I ask a question, Dave?
Sure.
You expressed some concern about the septic system being put in a Acre recharge area. If the system was upgraded to a BioClear system, how would that impact your thinking?
I'm not familiar with the BioClear system. I'd have to research the whole thing, Rick, but I believe that the appropriate disposition of this question is to the applicant and the applicant's consultants to demonstrate to the board what the impact of discharging the design discharge or the sewage effluent that would come from these units would be or potentially could be to the groundwater resources of the town. And there are all sorts of pre-treatment systems that could be employed, all of which would help out, I'm sure. There are mathematical models and modeling programs that can be used to address this issue. I believe that the board should ask the applicant to address the matter.
Yep, and that's actually what we did with Canterbrook. I believe there's a BioClear system in there, and it's a pre-treatment system with the discharge being almost drinkable water. So that's why I asked that question.
Yeah, I know that there are package treatment plants and pre-treatment systems of various names and natures and manufacturers that would go a long way to helping out on the that end of it. I still think that no matter what you do, the applicant should be required to install some groundwater observation wells down gradient from the from the septic disposal system in that hypothetical mapped recharge zone, so that if we have sewage waste making its way towards Beck's Pond, that we get a early warning of that. Obviously, these things take years to develop, but if we had some wells there, we'd sample the wells every 6 months or a year, just to make sure that we weren't going to mess up our own water supply system.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you.
You have to,
So, and we do have that number for you, Ms. Crouch. So, but just to wrap up, so Mr. Thompson's point is, you know, his 36 unit measurement was to determine a conventional, and the 50 units it's the math. Total minus development times 1, because you're in the GPO, even if you use the GPOD with the 80, gives you 50. So I think that's done. But Jeff and Brent, and as he said, it really is academic within the GPOD because we're not prohibited from doing any of this. But I do want to talk about the septic, but I do want Jeff and Brent to answer your question, Ms. Crouch, just because it's timely. So go ahead, Brent.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you for being patient with us, board. We came up with the calculation of 9.4%, which is below the 15% threshold. And we will fix that to the plan in this next revision.
okay, thank you. Richard Boroff has a question.
I want to.
Oh, Richard is here. Hey, Richard. Okay, great.
Yeah, hi. I got here late, Jill. Sorry.
No, please. I thank you very much for coming. I appreciate that.
Thank you for doing the work. Dave, I want to make sure I'm clear. The sand and gravel needs to be added to the soil and whatever is there. It isn't already there that's going to clear the effluent going towards Beck's Pond. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe that you probably have already done some investigation in the area of the on-site disposal system, some deep test pits. I'd be very curious to know whether you found a clean sand and gravel at significant depth. And if it does, it's to some extent verifies the geologic mapping that's the town has, which shows that recharge area goes through there. But I think there's a need for some borings to confirm that sand and gravel does make its way down to Beck's Pond.
So there is already some there. That's just.
I'm talking about material that's already there, Bora.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
All right,
Yes.
I don't want to get off on
Naturally
the,
deposited sand and gravel.
yeah, don't want to get off on septic disposal because the topic was the GPOD. So unless the board has any other questions, I'd like to move on.
But I recognize the issue, and I will table it, and we can put that on our next agenda.
Yep, good.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. Okay, so let us go back and keep going. Okay, so basically that's the whole GPOD conversation. I do want to go on and talk about inclusionary zoning. I am a little surprised that it's the issue it is, but I understand that we need to calculate, and I understand that this is an exceptionally important thing for the town of Hamilton. You know, I know that the town struggled and needed to amend its bylaw and did so in 2016. We respect that and want to follow that bylaw. But what I'd like to do, and what I think is a good exercise right now for the board, is let's just look at it. Let's look at the provisions. Let's look at some definitions, because I think, you know, Ms. Crouch, who is the chair, I think she's the chair, I apologize, I can't remember, of the Affordable Housing Trust. I think let's just go through a couple of the provisions and let's talk about them, because I think it's telling to do so. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up, and I'm not going to be artful. I'm going to struggle a little bit, so bear with me because I want to double screen. So I'm going to put up the definitions, right? And then I am going to put up side by side, if I can, side by side the provisions. Oh, here it is. For inclusionary housing. You know, can I ask you, do you see that square? When I show my screen, do you show everybody's name? Or can you see open? I'm just going to do that. I can't see you well. Okay, so let's go through inclusionary housing.
Jill, as you go through this, you should be citing the section that you're referencing of the, the bylaw, what bylaw, what section, as you're describing this, because several of us have the bylaw in front of us, so
Most certainly. Okay, so I would ask that you open up to page 68 of your bylaw, section 8.3, the inclusionary housing section. And then if you will, tab the definition section on page 113.
What was the first reference? 8
Most certain. 8.3 on page 68.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Everybody have it open?
Got it.
Perfect. Okay, so let's do it like we're back to the drawing board. We're really going to analyze it. We're going to apply pursuant to the meaning, and we can go through it, in a very systematic way. So inclusionary housing. Anything in the town of Hamilton that will produce more than 10 new units must comply with this provision. Okay, that's the applicability. And what's its purpose? I mean, I think we all know, right? The purpose is to produce, as it says under 8.3.1, produce high quality, affordable housing units to low and moderate income households, right? Well, that's all fine and dandy. What the heck does affordable housing unit mean? So if you will, let's flip to your definitions. And I do have them up on the screen, but I understand some of you want to flip to them. So if you just flip to page 113, what's an affordable housing unit? It is a dwelling or unit in assisted living facility or congregate residence that is affordable and occupied by low or moderate income household, okay? Now, we look down because your bylaw tells us what low and moderate income household is. I highlighted these just so it'd be easier for me to refer and easier to trigger your eyes. Low income housing is a household with income at or below 50%. Moderate income housing is a household at or below 80%. Those figures are both adjusted for household size. Both of them are adjusted. And that's what is the very determinative as far as our next discussion is going to go. So we know that affordable housing is low and moderate housing. We know that low and moderate housing means people with households that are adjusted for the size of their households. So we know that based on the definitions. Now let's go back to page 68 and 69, and let's go through the method, right, for providing affordable housing units. So if you look at section 8.3.4 on page 69, it is this planning board's purview and authority to determine how do we provide you with affordable housing. It's up to you to tell me how. We can do it 3 ways. The first way is impossibility, which means it's taken off the table. Senior housing cannot have on-site affordable housing off the table. So number 2, an applicant may donate land in lieu of providing affordable housing. That's an option. It's very difficult in the town of Hamilton to find a lot that can accommodate all this, and the result would always have to be a variance because you don't provide for large-scale affordable housing. It would have to be a 40B project or something else. But you can always donate land to do that. The only thing we could do, and it is a possibility, is we could subdivide off the farmland and actually create a 40B unit on that particular parcel, if the town wanted to do that. But I think that with the other project on Chabaco and the desire to maintain that bucolic view, that probably isn't the best use of the land in your community, or really what the intent of the senior housing bylaw or inclusionary bylaw is. In my opinion, and I think, with all due respect, I think it's a good opinion that the best method for delivering to you is to give you an equivalent fee in lieu. That can be used to buy deed riders in various types of communities and or, communities, nothing, within your town, but in different neighborhoods, I should have said. So how do we determine that fee? Because that's what we think is the best methodology. And I would like for the board to tell me if they agree this evening, if the equivalent fee is what it deems to be the best manner in which to satisfy this provision. So we are required to provide an equivalent fee in lieu of units. So granted, it's affordable housing units. Again, flips us back to the definition. That means low, moderate income household is the trigger for determining what that equivalent fee would be. And you look at the area median income. There's been a lot of discussion relative to what table to use, what provision to use, what is the right number. The right number is $80,850 for a two-person household. And I'm going to go then back to my presentation, which included, from the last time, the income limits. So basically, all I did was go into your bylaw, go into your definition section, and I obviously opted for moderate income. I suppose I could have opted for 50%, which would be the low, but I don't think that was the intent, and I respect that. It may not continue to be present in the language of the bylaw, but I do believe that was the intent of the bylaw, is to keep it at that 80% limit. And when you look at that, the number for a two-person household is $80,850. I'm just going to briefly explain what each column is because I think it's necessary. So if you will look to this first column, right? This first column is actually defined by this 100%. I'm sorry, I'm a horrible drawer. This particular column is actually this 100% four-person MFI. If you look up what MFI is, it'll tell you that it's $120,800 in a community like Hamilton. MFI means median family income. Your bylaw specifically says area median income. Area median income, pursuant to this table, is actually those sums set forth under all of the individual household descriptions. It are these. This is what HUD says are the area median income in your community for one person, two person, three person, four person households. So the senior housing is intended for two person households. It is exceptionally infrequent that you have more than two persons. And when you do, it is typically a disabled child who is an adult or a disabled parent who cannot live on their own, and the person who owns and or lives in the unit is taking care of that parent who needs assistance. So I just wanted to make sure we went through that because I know there was some concern relative to it. I just put this in before to show you the difference between low income, moderate income. According to HUD, 80% can still be considered low income. It's just that under your definitions, it's considered moderate. Okay, so let me see, where am I gonna go? From here, I would like to actually show you, and I apologize because I actually did not include this in the submittal that I think Patrick had distributed to all of you earlier. This is something I just wanted to show you now. Is actually in here? Yeah, here it is. I'm gonna blow this up. Can you tell me if this is, are you able to see this clearly if I blow it up like that?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful.
Can you center it on the page?
So
Jill, can you center it on the page?
Pardon?
I actually have it, but just for the people that are looking at it, can you center your document on the page?
Oh, I'm sorry, I made it so big I didn't center it. Yeah, I apologize. So the reason why I was doing that is I was focusing on how we provide units. I will tell you that when you take the $80,850 and follow your bylaw, I'm going to flip again, I apologize, but I want to make sure everybody can follow the exact bylaw. When you follow your bylaw, what we're required to do is to provide 3 times the area median income. So 3 times 80,850, right? Times 6. is what we determine to be the payment, and the result of that is $1,455,300, which is a substantial sum. So basically, 3 times 8,000 is the 242,550. So now, if I may, under your bylaw, right, how do we know how many units we need to provide? How do you process that information? The way your bylaw reads is, I'm gonna show you here. Basically, it says the first 10 units, you have to provide 1 affordable housing unit. For each 7th unit thereafter, you have to create an additional affordable housing unit, okay? So we all know what the triggers are. The triggers are 10 and 7. So what the CFO of the company, Julia Dickinson, did is just thought, you know what, I'm gonna provide it in an Excel spreadsheet that will be easy for people to assess. So you can see units 1 through 10. That triggers, by the bylaw, 1 on-site unit or 1 payment, which is the equivalent of that. Again, now the 7 units that follow. So it would be units 11 through 17, it triggers 1. 18 through 24 triggers 1. 25 through 31 triggers 1. 31 through 38 triggers 1. 39 through 35 triggers 1. We only have 45 through 50. We do not trigger the 7th unit. Therefore, we do not owe an additional payment in lieu or an additional on-site unit. The math incorporated by town meeting in that particular bylaw provision was intended to allow the developer to build a certain number and then have the requirement. I would say that because this particular provision, we are capped at 50. We can't go over it. So it isn't like we stopped at 50 to be able to avoid. We stopped at 50 because we cannot develop more. And it is imperative for us to be able to build 2 additional units if we were to have to provide any more affordable housing, which is why we're saying this doesn't trigger a 7th unit. We only are required to provide 6. And that's something we can discuss now. But so the math is 1,455,300. And the methodology for payment, that's just set by the formula you have in there. It's the same thing. We provide for exactly how you would do it under your bylaw provision, and that's something we can discuss later with regard to timing. But to suffice it to say that, when we have, we will pay 15%, 10% of the payment in lieu when we have a certain number of units built. So when we get our 15th building permit, that's when we're going to start to make payments, and you can see what the proposal is. Okay. I'm going to go back here. So basically, that is our proposal relative to the inclusionary housing bylaw. And I would ask if anybody has any questions, Mr. Mitchell, relative to that.
Okay, I'll start over on this side. Richard? Jonathan?
No.
Bill?
No.
Barney?
I'm up. I have many questions. You mentioned building 6 units on the farmland. What do you think it would cost to build 6 affordable units on that farmland? Do you think it would cost more than the amount of money that you're proposing to donate?
Oh, of course it would, but we actually can sell them then at $200 and something thousand. So for each unit sold, we would get back money, at least $200,000 per unit. So it'd be,
Right,
we
but
would
could you
yield
actually-
$1.2 million. So you can't, they're apples and oranges.
Well, actually not. If you elected to build them, could you build them for for what you're selling them for? They're affordable units, so could you build them for what, the $240,000 that you're, 242,000? Could you build a unit for that amount of money?
Probably because because we're donating the land. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a builder. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, but I don't think it's relevant.
Oh, I think it's really relevant because,
But your bylaw does not ask me how much I can build for. I mean, the question probably is, yes, because they're affordable units and they don't have, granite countertops and, marble floors. But that's not what your bylaw doesn't say. You have to provide an equivalent fee. I don't even equal to the cost of building a unit. It specifically says what it says. You need to provide
actually,
an
what it
equivalent
said-
payment 3 times.
Could I,
that
can I jump in here for a second? So,
Yeah, of course.
First of all, before we start going off on a tangent, I want to find out, Marnie, do you accept the formulas that she's presented?
no.
So then let's address that rather than going off on talking about
Well,
different types of housing.
Yeah, I was, so, and I don't mean this disrespectfully because I recognize that you are very ably representing your client. At the affordable, we'll start with the computation of the number of units. And, a member of our Affordable Housing Trust did an alternate computation. I'm not going to go on record saying I adopt her approach or I disagree with her approach. But at the Affordable Housing Trust meeting, the trust members voted to request the planning board to refer the computation issue to our town council, so town council could weigh in on the appropriate methodology to determine the number of units. In your view, it's 6, and the member of the Affordable Housing Trust came up with the
All
number
right, so
7.
let's stop right there. So I think that's worthy discussion. I haven't heard any questions from any other board member on the computation. Does any other board member have a question on the computation?
This number of $242,000, that comes from the Department of Housing and Urban Development?
Excuse me, Bill.
And I wanted the applicant to answer the question.
No, but I think we're
Yes, it
determining-
does.
Yeah,
It comes
so-
from the
so-
table that I've
so
shown you, and I can
this-
put it back up.
This is a number that HUD says you can afford to build a, 1,000 square foot or whatever it is, housing unit under our program, meeting our standards for this amount of money.
No.
No.
Where, that, okay, so we're meeting the HUD standard, which is that's the amount of money you have to set aside, as opposed to that's the amount of money that it costs to actually build a unit? What
So
is?
I can explain. So what this table actually is, and that's why you have a multiple of 3. So what the income limit actually does is it sets the purchase price that we're able to charge. So assume, for sake of argument, that we were going to build an affordable unit in Hamilton. And we created this 2-person household unit. What HUD says then is, okay, let's look at the 2-person house AMI, which is the $80,850. And then it says a person who earns $80,850 a year can afford to pay blank for a home. And it ends up being, it's about $200,000, I think $202,000. And the way they do that is formulaic. They actually impute principal, interest, taxes, insurance, and operating costs. And because it's condominium, they just take that value of the condominium charge. If you were going to do it here, but you would be doing it off-site, so just be general maintenance.
So excuse me for a second, so the 242 number comes, that's what they say people with the 80% AMI can afford to buy a house of that value, not
Yes.
whether they can construct the house. Okay?
Okay, so yeah, so Mr.
That's the
Wheaton,
amount of money-
you're so on the right track, yes.
And
So you're
that's
100%
the
correct.
amount of money that we can charge a developer, regardless of what it costs. And that's part of the HUD rules, the 40B rules, and so on. Now, clearly, if we were a planning board in Beverly Hills, you could not come anywhere near close to building a house in Beverly Hills for that price, even a little small house, but they would come under the same rules if it's supposed to be HUD.
So, right, so what this does is it simply tells you what a person of that income limit can afford. So it sets the floor and the ceiling, it's the price, period, that a developer can charge for the home. So if we build a unit and we build a 1,600 square foot unit, and it costs us 100, and I'm making up numbers because it's even. It costs us whatever it costs us to build, no matter what, we have to sell it to them for the $200,000 price. In general, the cost of the home, it does not, is pretty much matched by the price you're getting, but with all of the other stuff involved, I don't know what the developer's real imputed costs are, but I can assure you that the reason we use this formula is nothing to do with you trying to project that, because the amount you're charging is based on each unit that's going to be sold at traditional pricing that's just going to go to the town now. So what ends up happening is that's why you said in your equivalent payment that you use this formula. If you wanted to base it on the cost of construction, you could have said it, but you cannot change. You cannot change now the bylaw. You could have during town meeting. I suppose you could have tried to endorse that. But I think that this probably formula yielded a better and more reliable price because it was uniform, and any bylaw must be uniformly applied or it's deemed to be arbitrary and capricious. So what you did before, you only had it 2 times this number. And what your board determined, I think in concert with the AHT, and I think Mr. Wheaton, for some reason, I think you were actually involved in this too. You all said, you know what, 2 times is not enough, juice it up to 3. And that's the result. And that's what your bylaw says, 3 times the HUD income limit. That's what it is. It couldn't be, quite frankly, more clear. It is most certainly not subject to interpretation relative to what you use.
Okay, let's hold on there, Jill. Jonathan?
I have nothing to add to that.
Richard?
I have nothing to add.
I have nothing to add.
I'm totally satisfied as to where that number comes from and how it's derived. Thank you.
Let me finish, because I am actually going to...
I actually haven't finished, and I was interrupted. We got completely off track.
No, actually, we didn't, Marnie. We're focusing on the formula. You started off on building equivalent housing.
No, I just asked...
Excuse me. You'll get your chance to talk. I want the board to opine on each section so we go through and not get off track. So give me a minute. You get back to the other topics.
No, and I have issues with...
I got that. I got that. So I would just like to opine that previously we've applied this formula in 2 separate projects, Patton Ridge and Canterbrook. And this formula was used in both of those, endorsed by both of the planning boards, and there was never any question that this formula was incorrect or improperly applied. So to come and question it now it seems to be out of the blue that somehow we're going to redefine this formula as it exists in the bylaw, as it was determined by the Attorney General who approved this bylaw, and its practice and implementation and intent. So that's my comment. Now, Pat, do you have anything else?
Nothing else for me, no.
Okay. Marnie?
Yes. Okay, so can we go back, and I apologize for getting a little off track with the reference to the farmland development. But the Affordable Housing Trust considered Section 8.3.3 and the computation of the number of units. You came up with 6 units. A member of our board did a separate computation, and she came up with 7 units. So that's under section 8.3.3, which refers to the requirement for an affordable unit with the 10th unit, and then a unit for every 7 subsequent units that the developer builds. So the members of the Affordable Housing Trust requested that the planning board refer the computational issue under 8.3.3 to town council to weigh in on whether the applicant is correct or whether the member of our Affordable Housing Trust correctly made a computation coming up with 7 units.
Can I make an observation, Mr. Chair?
Well, are you finished with that point?
I'm finished with that point, but
Okay,
then.
no, I know you got more. I'm just,
I know,
I want to
I
take
But on
this,
that point-
I want to take
So
these
on-
one at a time.
On that issue, under 8.3.3, I would move that we refer the computational issue to town council to weigh in and either approve the methodology of the applicant or to say that the
Okay.
Affordable Housing Trust member was correct in her interpretation
I got it, I
of
got it.
8.3.3.
You can stop. Okay. Mr. Chair, given the strength of, oh, yeah, I'm sorry, it keeps going down. Given the experience and expertise of Ms. Mann, I would go with her computations over those of the Affordable Housing Trust. The Affordable Housing Trust are very lovely people, very intelligent, very well-meaning, but she's got the experience, and I'd go with her interpretation for the time being.
So the question arises here, do we engage the town council to review this? I personally don't support that. I think it's a distraction. I think the individual who's new to the Affordable Housing Trust, who has not had any experience in building affordable housing or dealing with any of these bylaws, has come up with her own interpretation, and she's welcome to her opinion, but she's not welcome to her own facts. And I think trying to pursue this is really a distraction when, in fact, the planning board, so far, other members don't have a question with this formula. So,
Excuse
so
me,
I'm going
We're
to,
talking about 2 formulas. We have a formula under 8.3.3, and then we have the determination of the actual payment in lieu. So-
yes, and so the one thing that we're talking now is, as I believe it is the computation under the number of units that is required under the inclusionary housing bylaw. And so far, I've heard no question from any planning board member that they feel that it's incorrectly computed, and I've already cited the example of 2 other projects that have used that. So we have intent and we have precedence. So I'm not getting the sense that this board is actually interested in disputing this. And
Plus,
I'm-
given, I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, but given Ms. Mann's,
I got that.
yeah, okay.
I
Thank
got
you.
it.
I
So-
mean, mathematically, this is simply a question of what do you want to do with the fractional housing unit, right? It's never going to divide perfectly, so you're always going to have, sort of a part of, or 3 units, or 2 units, or one unit left over. And in all the other projects, we said we truncated. We did not round. We truncated. And so that's what the proposal here is to truncate. If you have 6.5, if you could be required to have 6.5 units, then you only pay for 6.
Well,
Okay.
actually,
And so we would be consistent, that this formulation is consistent with the other proposals
and
which do that.
I personally agree with that, and I don't really dispute this computation. I am just relating to you what transpired at the Affordable Housing Trust. They did request that the planning board refer that computational issue to town council. But if no one's willing to make a motion, no one's willing to make a motion. I could make a motion to do it. Would I have a second?
Plus, Mr. Chair, on the page where it says inclusionary bylaw analysis, 45 to 50 units, zero fewer than 7 units.
Yeah,
It's a non-issue here.
you can make a motion, but I don't hear any support for it.
The chart that the applicant has provided us is mirror image to a chart that I made for myself to make sure that I comprehended the text as well as the numerology, and it was identical to this.
And to be honest, I can't dispute it. I am relating,
Good.
know, the
So-
affordable
So
housing
I
trust.
think.
I get it.
that
So,
topic-
so what I'm trying to get here, Marnie, is I appreciate you bringing that up. That person made that comment. No other member, including yourself, believes that it's valid. So why are we spending this amount of time arguing about this that nobody agrees is valid?
Okay, well, now we can go to the next
Good,
section.
thank you.
Okay? And as Ms. May correctly points out, our bylaw provides an equivalent fee in lieu of units for each required unit shall be 3 times the area median income as determined by HUD income limits, which includes Hamilton. Now, what's helpful to understand is are 2 things. One is this bylaw was adopted in April of 2019. So it was not in effect when the special permits were issued for Patton Ridge or Canterbrook. Those special permits were issued under a prior version of the bylaw, which I will read to you right now. Well, I do have the, let me see if I can find it.
Mr. Chair, where are we going with this?
It's a question of the amount of.
Let her finish.
Okay.
Just keep going, keep going.
Well, yes, okay, so the prior version said an equivalent fee in lieu of units may be made. The planning board may allow a developer of non-rental dwelling units to make a cash payment to the town through its affordable housing trust for each affordable housing unit required herein. The cash payment per unit shall be in accordance with the following formula: 2 times and an amount equal to 80% of the area median income for a family of 4 in the metropolitan area or non-metropolitan area that includes the town of Hamilton. So, as you can see, the present bylaw omitted 80%, and it omitted any reference to a family of 4. So, assuming for the sake of argument that 80% applies, why don't we use a family of 4? So, you know, the drafters of the amended bylaw, it's hard to discern their intent, because now we have a formula, but the bylaw contains no formula. And I scoured our town's website trying to discern where such a formula exists. So 2 issues arise from that. One, a new bylaw, actions under an old bylaw can't necessarily determine how we interpret the present bylaw. And secondly, the planning board that used the prior formula can't really bind this planning board in determining the fee in lieu. So my suggestion is, one, you know, the town, when it adopted the bylaw, intended to throw everything out, or perhaps it intended to merely increase the multiplier from 2 to 3, but also inferentially include the 80% reference and the reference to the family of 4, which of course would result in a higher payment. And finally, that the planning board wanted to eliminate all those references, so the bylaw was so amorphous that it was the amount of the payment would be subject to negotiation. So under those circumstances, I personally would recommend and move that the planning board refer the interpretation of the present bylaw to town council for some type of a definitive answer as to what was intended here or how we should apply this language, which is it's difficult. And so, and Ms. Mann uses 80%, fine, but why is she limiting it to two-person household? I mean, actually, under a scenario of 2 bedrooms, you could have 3 persons, 4 persons. So it doesn't really make sense to me to say 2 persons. And at the prior meeting, at which point the applicant was using a formula to allocate between 1 person and 2-person households, Rick rightly said that doesn't make much sense. So the applicant has now gone with a 2-person income, and I would argue that 4 is what is required
Be
here.
careful what you wish for. In the census, all right, 4-person households cannot afford as much housing with the same income as 2-person households. After all, they have to feed and clothe the 2 extra people. So it may turn out, if you push this, okay, what you're going to want, remember, this is not what it costs to build anything. This is what can afford, you want to say, what can a 4-person household afford, as opposed to what a 2-person household can afford, which is what Ms. Mann is saying.
We're not really talking about what the households can afford. We're talking about the equivalent fee. And so, you know, the town of Hamilton would get this equivalent fee in installments, and essentially, we would have money.
Isn't the equivalent fee based on what a household of a certain size, that is 80% of the AMI, can afford through the HUD analysis?
Right, but that
Isn't that
has
what-
nothing to do with who's going to buy the units that are,
That's
Yeah.
what HUD will, so it's all based on what HUD will buy a unit for. If it has this many people, or it's designed for this many people?
well,
I don't-
when they put the housing on the market, it's marketed to people, you know, in certain income brackets, and regardless of how much the property costs to construct, they
I
pay
mean,
a certain amount of
I
money.
understand there's a legal question here about, since we were vague when we redrafted it, will the provisions of the earlier draft carry over where we were vague in the redrafting? Okay? I understand that, and you want to refer that legal question over.
Well,
okay?
I think it's actually a safer endeavor for this planning board to essentially engage an expert to help us interpret this bylaw than to sit here tonight and say, this is what it means. I think we need to examine the minutes of the planning board, the special permit application, because I think originally at Canterbrook, they were going to have 2 affordable units on site. And so I think.
No, they were never going to have 2
No.
affordable units on site.
Well, excuse me, but I mean, I did go back and try and read all the minutes from the planning board regarding Canterbrook, and I was struck at the absence of some of the minutes on the town's website, and I was never able to get a hold of the actual findings under the senior housing bylaw for Canterbrook. I didn't ask Patrick for it, but they are not readily available.
So I have a question, Marty. To what end are you advocating this?
I am advocating for this because it would potentially increase the payment to the Affordable Housing Trust by approximately $400,000. Or, depending on what town council says, it's room for negotiation. But I think, given the iterations of the inclusionary housing bylaw, it makes sense to try and ascertain what the intention was when we dropped the references to 80% and 4-family household.
So you're going to ask town council to try and figure out what the prior planning board's intent was. That's a.
Ms. Mann has told us what that intent was, and I don't know why she would be.
No, she's actually taking the bylaw and the as it reads now and applying it, and Bill has described it in some detail, it's not unlike the formula that was used to compute the number of units. So again, I applaud the level of effort you've put into this. I understand the Affordable Housing Trust would like to maximize the payment from the developer. But again, pardon my expression, but I feel like we're getting off on a tangent here that is not productive in terms of getting us to determine whether this project is viable or not, and does it protect groundwater? Does it protect the neighbors? Is it a project that the kind of project that this town wants? By trying to go back and reinterpret this particular clause of the bylaw. Again, I'm going to ask the board for its...
Well, could I respond to that, please?
Sure.
My recollection is that the Tobacco Trails Association has raised an issue under the inclusionary bylaw. So when we make our findings relative to this project, it would behoove us to have some confidence in the decisions we make if we rely on town council for his interpretation. And for all any of us know, he might come back and say, Miss Mann is absolutely right. So I think it's
a valid
something,
argument. It's a valid argument.
We should consider. And then the second point I would make, referring this to town council has absolutely no effect in the short term on this project, because we are at the very preliminary stage. We haven't even gotten into the really hard issues with respect to the water supply and whatnot, and we don't even know whether, in fact, 50 units would be built. So in terms of sending this to town council for his opinion, we are not delaying this project one bit.
No, I get it. No, I get it.
And we are actually giving ourselves the opportunity to hear from essentially someone who would have the expertise to look into this and advise us as to what the proper interpretation of this bylaw is, given the prior bylaw and how
I get it.
the existing bylaw did not apply to cannabis.
You've made your point. So
Well, I apologize, Mr. Mitchell. Can I just say one thing? Relative, the board can't defer this to town council. You actually have to make an interpretation, and then you ask if it's the right one, if it's substantiated. But the board is the opinioning board. You are the discretionary board. You have the power, not town council. So if you want to say, this is the way we read it based on this, do you agree? Do we have support? Do you think we're going to be, that you can do. But to defer to town council, for your interpretation, you cannot. You can ask about ambiguities, you can ask about constraints, you can ask about a whole bunch of different things, but town council is never going to assert itself and tell you how to read that.
Yeah.
They're just not going to.
And that's my concern, maybe not properly or clearly articulated, is asking the town council to figure out what the intent of prior boards is a fool's errand and impossible, and no attorney would ever put down on paper what they think the prior board's intent was. So,
well, I can tell you from my reading that the overall intent was to increase the amount of payment to the Affordable Housing Trust. So I think
please, you're lecturing somebody who's spent the last 18 years promoting affordable housing in this town, and was a primary author of the Inclusionary Housing bylaw, the Senior Housing bylaw, and is actually has one of the prime movers in construction of the now 9 units of affordable housing. So please don't tell me that the Affordable Housing Trust needs more money. I'm on it. I'm supportive. What I'm trying to do is manage a process here, interpret the bylaws, and have the planning board look at the bylaw as it exists now and the information that is provided by the applicant and the information that is provided by HUD, the documents, and come to an interpretation. And if our interpretation is incorrect, then we can have our town council opine on that to avoid making a mistake, as you would like to do. And I think that's important, Marnie, that we don't make a mistake, that we make this as bulletproof as process as possible. So I'd like to ask the other board members how they're feeling about this and where they'd like to go. So we'll start with Richard.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we've been working with this, the bylaw as it is for some time now. We have all your experience, which is, how many years did you say?
Too many.
Well, too many, but I don't think it's many enough yet. We have another person who has hardly any experience on this board, questioning your experience, and I think that's out in left field somewhere, but I shouldn't really go that way.
Yeah, let's deal with the
Okay.
facts.
The
Let's deal with the
past
facts.
says we have used this for a long time. We've been making our decisions right along. We know how to make the decision. We should continue doing exactly that way. We don't need to
Okay,
reinvent the wheel.
good. All right, thank you.
Yeah,
Jonathan.
thank you.
So I agree the way the bylaw is worded is a bit vague, but I also agree that the words are the words and we have to make an interpretation from them. And maybe a better venue for this discussion is after this application, if we want to revisit that piece of the bylaw and make it clearer. So that would be my suggestion. So, but I don't read anything differently in reading the words. You know, I agree that the intent might have been something else, but I have no knowledge of that.
Okay. Bill?
Reasonable people could disagree on this. The town would disagree presumably on the high side, and the developer would reasonably, use smaller households because it would give a smaller number. There's nothing in the statute that specifies, that allows us to exactly calculate this.
It's vague.
So it's vague.
So, what are your thoughts? Would you be willing to make a decision and go with the interpretation as presented?
This number, 242, is, looks like it's spot on for a three-person household with 80% median income. Or is this supposed to be
It's a
median
two-person.
in income? Is it 80% or median?
Two. It's two-person.
It's a two-person
And
household,
it's median or 80% of median?
80% of median.
80% of median family income.
I'm just
I-
looking, I'm
I'll
looking
put it
here
up.
at the Boston area. Oh, median family. This is household or family?
So it's 80% of median family income for a two-person
Median
household.
Household income is gonna be less than family in.
Right, so the two-person household
Okay, so
income is 80,850, based on HUD's experience for people in a moderate, low income.
Household two-person income is only 71,000, because you got a lot of.
One person, yes, 70,750.
No, for two persons, you have a lot of single people. So, in a household as opposed to a family, it's a difference. Okay?
There is, and with senior especially, because typically,
Right. I mean,
at that
the
point,
numbers are with, I'm happy with these numbers. As long as our bylaw is vague, the petitioner has a perfectly reasonable set of numbers.
Okay, Pat?
I guess, given the payment schedule that's being proposed, it wouldn't be probably until sometime next year when do we apply the HUD numbers from what, so this is a report on April of 2021 for the year of 2021. I don't disagree with the math at all, but the HUD, I don't know how they change year to year either, but whether it's that year's HUD
it
or.
varies. It's like a couple of $1,000 sometimes. Sometimes it goes lower, not usually.
Yes.
I'm
looking at 2019.
I think it happens every April.
Okay, so what's your point, Pat?
Just a question of what HUD report to apply, is it at the time of payment or is it at the time of approval, or?
Jill, what's the answer to that question? Is it a time of payment that is tied to the schedule, or is it a time of the decision?
It's the time of the decision.
Okay, so it would be
That's it,
tied, if the decision is made this year, then it would be tied to this. If the decision goes to another year, it would be in the next year.
That's the only question.
Okay, so, I think I'm comfortable with the formula as proposed. But I'm mindful of your comment about opining on this, so I would have no problem opining on this and then asking town council for a review to determine if in fact we've interpreted that within the bounds of our ability to do so.
Well, I would agree with that, because to me, the issue really comes down to whether we are bound by a two-person income
No, I get
or a
the argument.
four-person. So,
I'm more on the strategy now.
and I agree with that strategy. So if we were to go forward,
So I want to ask the board, or do we, you individually, feel comfortable with that approach? Or do you want to just make a decision and move on to the next topic? We'll start with Richard.
I've kind of lost it. I'm not auditorial.
All right, you can abstain.
I can abstain.
I support that strategy.
Which one?
To not vote on it tonight, but.
No, we would vote on it and then ask for.
Yes, vote on it, yes. Vote on it and then ask the
Town
town
council.
council if they agree, and then
Right, okay.
if there's an issue, we deal with it.
Okay.
I'll go along with that.
So will I.
that would
Okay,
be a
so-
conditional approval subject to.
Right, no, I get it. Conditional, subject to the approval of other parts of the bylaw. Oh, and Patrick, are you okay, or Pat?
I don't think I can vote.
No, I just want your
Oh,
opinion.
yeah, my opinion is that's the right course of action.
And Patrick, are you?
Yeah, I
any-
think it's appropriate.
Okay. So I think we have consensus that that's what we'll do. So I'm going to ask for the planning board to take a vote on accepting the interpretation of the applicant, subject to having town council review our decision and determine if in fact it is a valid and legally defensible interpretation.
Were you saying that as a motion?
Yeah, I think so.
Second?
Okay. Any comment? All right, we'll do a roll call. Marnie, I can't imagine how you're going to vote on this, but
I will vote aye, because I think there's,
no, you don't have to explain.
it's a good approach.
Bill?
Aye.
Jonathan?
Aye.
Aye.
And Rick Mitchell, aye. So it's unanimous. So
Mr.
we
Mitchell,
have-
may I ask, I know that Mr. Delacroix, Emil is out there somewhere. I don't know if he can raise his hand one way or another, because I know he's watching.
I haven't seen any
haven't found
hands
him.
raised. Have you, Pat?
I haven't found him.
Say again?
I've not found Emil.
There is oh, no.
If Emil is on and he can raise his hand, then
Yeah.
then we can find him.
Emil, if you're out there, we'd love to have your opinion, but he went home sick, so he may not be watching.
Yeah, and I just figure if he's there, I
No,
apologize
no,
for
I
the
get it,
interruption.
I get it. I'm not seeing anything coming up,
Okay.
He didn't have COVID symptoms.
so we'll assume that
He's not there yet.
he's not there.
He might be watching. We'll find out next time. Okay.
There he is.
Oh, where? Did he raise his hand?
I just found him. He didn't raise his hand.
Okay.
Emil
Oh, I
was
can't.
once lost, but now he's been found. Did he raise his hand?
Didn't.
I don't think he's on.
Right here.
Oh, okay. Well, let's see if he is on.
Might have to accept my promotion.
Pardon our pause while we're trying to see if one of our board members is on via Zoom.
So I think he has to accept
Say again?
promoted. Emil has to accept. He might not be on.
Say again?
He might be on, but not
with us.
Okay, so I think we have finished the inclusionary housing bylaw section.
Thank you.
All right, good, thank you. Always a spirited discussion, which I think is important to have, Marnie, so thank you for
Certainly.
that. And again, we all have our own opinions, and it's great to get these out and have these expressed and hashed out and figure out how to move forward. So, thank you to everybody. All right, so what's next?
So if possible, I would love to engage in a conversation about, the applicability of GPOD, and then if it's even necessary, and then confirm the density. And I think that maybe, Mr. Mitchell, that the best way to do that is just to go through the eligibility components and see how the board feels and make a determination.
I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, board members, I think we've kind of come to a conclusion that GPOD, that, as I think Bill put it, is an academic discussion. Go ahead.
I have something that seems off the subject, but I feel it is on the subject, and that's...
I'm going to caution you, got to stay on the subject.
Yes, so, but it directly goes to GPOD.
Oh, okay.
And that is the definition of lot as far as this application goes.
Oh, yeah, we've had this argument, so go ahead. I think I know where it's going.
Okay, so from a procedural point of view, a legal point of view, and a practical point of view, I'm troubled by the fact that this application is 133 Essex Street. That's the lot. It has a parcel number and a map number and all that. But there's several scenarios being put forth as far as dividing it up. And I think it would kind of clean up and clarify this process if we could define what the lot really is, and that would put the GPOD issue to bed instantly.
Okay, I think that's good.
I feel that's the place to start.
So are you looking for a specific definition on the map?
No, I would like the applicant to clarify what is the lot. Is it 133 Essex? Is it 133 Essex without the farmland? Is it 133 Essex without what? What is it?
Sure. So the reason why I bring it up in that way is because it's a moot point. Whether it applies or not, it has no impact. We meet the impervious amount. We're still allowed to go to 50 units. We are a permitted use. There's no impact. My whole point is the intent of your bylaw was not to have this particular property in the development area all be considered GPOD. I'll give you the perfect example. If you look at other lots that are more proximate to GPOD, that are located closely but are outside the GPOD, they're not affected. And the only reason I said, look, it truly means when you have a lot that you are developing, you can't then try to say if there's 1/3 of it and you're gonna put a septic system on it, that you don't have to comply with the GPOD requirements. That makes sense. But to extend it to a 66-acre lot where none of the development is on that particular portion of the GPO, not even close, that it shouldn't apply. But so that's my point. It doesn't apply, and I don't think the intent was to apply, and I think that when you draw out the meaning, it makes even less sense.
Okay,
But
Jill, can I see if I can cut?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Mitchell.
No, go ahead. I want to see if I can cut to what Jonathan is getting at.
Yes.
I think what you're saying, but I could be wrong, is I think what Jonathan's saying is it 16 acres? Is that the lot that you're looking for a definition of?
No.
No, if I were to do that, my lot would be, I'm going to blow this up. That's why I had done this particular, so this would be the lot. So the farmland I would carve out, which I have I have it by meets and bounds even. I think Brent has it. I would carve out the farmland from the general property because it's a separate piece of land, separate purposes. It's leased out. And then that leaves me a balance of about 57 acres of land, 13 are wetland. I subtract them to get my developable area, which is 43.8 acres of land.
Can I interrupt? I agree with all your math. it's the definition of lot that I'm troubled with. In other words,
So-
if you want to carve out the farmland, it seems like you need to just do that and amend the permit so that it doesn't include the farmland, and then it
I
would
don't
clean
even
things
have
up.
to amend the permit, and I'll tell you why, because I can take adjacent parcels of land and still dedicate them to open space and give them to you. Like, I wouldn't want to remove it because I wouldn't want to take it out of that calculation to be able to have it be part of the CR. So simply what I would do is provide meets and bounds and show it as a separate lot. So for example, when we go forward with applications all the time, and I know for a fact that most of you have seen this, I can take multiple lots. Sometimes I can even take them from different owners, aggregate it and go. And they're separate lots. And I would do the same here. I'd say, okay, the farmland is separate. It's a distinct parcel. It's distinct use. It's not even going to be part of the true open space with the trails unless it's abandoned. And that's how I would do it. And I would take it out, and then I don't trigger anything. And then you don't have to go through the machinations of any more interpretations relative to GPOD.
Then let me play. Then may I play it a different way? So if you don't want to take the farmland out, then, and we've said that the GPOD is academic, to quote other people, not myself. Why not just leave it in there, and then we proceed, which means that it is subject to GPOD, and it doesn't change your math. It just is subject to GPOD.
I mean, I can do that because it's not subject to GPOD, in my opinion. That's why. And I just don't. I think that we all understand that this is just going to be a contentious process, and I would rather have the decision be that it's not subject to GPOD.
Okay.
I still struggle with that from a legal point of view, and I
can file an A&R plan tomorrow and make it a separate lot. I mean, I can. It is. I mean, under your definition, if there's distinct boundaries, which there are because it's legally committed to another property owner, where that green land is legally committed to someone else.
So
It's just
Excuse me,
because it's the
if it
same
was-
owner, we never broke it up.
In answer to your question, if the GPOD were to govern exclusively, then the Zoning Board of Appeals would be the entity that issued the special permit, not the planning board.
We don't need a special permit. There's nothing that requires it. No triggers.
yeah, I'm not sure.
I understand that. It just troubles me to have sort of multiple definitions of the lot here. And if the rest of the board can help me through this, then I accept it. But I have never encountered anything where you have an address with a map and a parcel number, and then you divide it up differently within an application without legal meets and bounds.
I mean, I think Jonathan has a really good, relevant issue in dealing with how GPOD operates. If you had any big piece of land, and the rule was if 30% of it, if 30% of your piece of land was in GPOD, then the GPOD applied to the whole parcel, then you could always just carve off the piece that you were worried about and say, well, now, and none of my parcel is subject to GPOD. Developers could just get around it by carving off the part that did.
And they do, by the way.
Well,
But the reason why this provision was enacted is because typically it's when you need that
Hold on, one
additional
person at a
area.
time, one person at a time.
Oops, I'm sorry.
I believe it is a slippery precedent.
So I hear it, I'm just trying to figure out what the essence is here. What nut are we trying to get at?
To just have a clean process. So that's the first piece. And then
So what's not clean about it? You're uncomfortable with the fact that it's not a specific...
Any piece of land can be subdivided. It sets a precedent for taking any piece of land and subdividing it to eliminate the part of the land that is subject to GPOD, and then going ahead and developing the rest of the land, as if GPOD didn't matter.
or any other zoning
But you can do
overlay.
that.
Whereas,
I think you can already do that, so
Yes, as a legal subdivision that's recognized by the planning board and by the registry of deeds. So
Right, okay. So, It's an interesting discussion, but the applicant is the one that's at risk here, right?
Well, except I understand that point, yes, and I believe the planning board's at risk as well, because
How are we at risk?
to use Bill's example, basically you can arbitrarily then just define pieces of lots as separate
We're
without
not-
actually I'm not talking about actually subdividing. If it was actually subdivided, it cleans this up. But if it's not subdivided and, legally subdivided, I think others have brought this up. I think Attorney Ellison brought it up.
Well, I would expect that Attorney Ellison would bring up any and all objections that she could think that would be viable. So that's not a standard that I would measure our decision by.
No, absolutely not. But I'm just saying that it really doesn't feel comfortable as a legal procedure that we would deliberate and vote on. It doesn't seem like it seems like something that somebody could challenge as a process.
I agree. Somebody could challenge that. And again, I want everybody here to think both tactically. We have to go up and down here and nitty-gritty details, and then think strategically.
Agreed.
So this is another one that we could ask legal counsel, but actually Jill included 2 documents from our prior legal counsel about how GPOD is used, because this question came up before, and the board let the applicant proceed with the way they wanted to, and they took the risk. If the applicant is willing to take the risk that their definition that they're asking us to endorse is defensible, then I have no problem with that, because it's not my risk, it's their risk.
I still feel it's a multiple risk. I feel it's a risk to the applicant, and it's a risk to the planning board in the future.
I think I can resolve this. I can put meets and bounds on the plan, and all I need to do is continue to keep it and add the reference to a different assessor map and parcel. That's all. And I'll do that. I'm going to still make it part of the application. I'm still going to, keep it farmed, and I'm still going to make it subject to the open space, but I'll carve it. I have no problem doing that. And I understand the concerns of Mr. Wheaton and Mr. Poor. You just want to make it clear. You don't want it to be some, ambiguous lot line. You want it to be a lot line that's been put in place, endorsed by the board as approval not required, because it's a parcel of land that contains the proper amount of square footage, the proper amount of frontage, and we can do that. That is not a problem, and I can address your concerns, and I most certainly will do that. I don't want to make the board uncomfortable at all. So I can take care of that. I'll submit a plan through Patrick, in the normal A&R course, and we will resolve your issue. But I promise you that I'm going to keep it in the open space.
Well, that resolves the issue, because and I understand why you're struggling, because the language of the GPOD bylaw is completely and utterly unambiguous.
Yes, it is. And the lot lines are ambiguous on this application.
Well, the lot line, if you look at their plans, there's one lot.
Yes, exactly. One lot, yes. So yes,
that cleans it up.
That would clean it up, and that satisfies my concerns.
I apologize for making it confusing. I was not intending to do so. I'm sorry, and I promise you I'll resolve it tomorrow. I promise.
Okay, does that resolve your?
It does, as long as the rest of the board supports that.
I have no problem. Clarity is fine.
No problem either.
No, thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you very much.
And with that, I believe, I know that seemed like a sideline, but with that cleans up the GPOD issue.
It does.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Poor.
So let me go around the board and because that's sort of where we started.
That's the point here, yes.
Bill, are you comfortable given what Jonathan has added to the discussion?
Yes, I think subdividing this in the way described will clean up the GPOD issue, and I have no problem with that.
Okay, Marnie?
I agree. It eliminates the issue.
Okay, Pat?
Agreed.
Okay, and I agree as well, so can I, I'm sorry, Richard?
I agree.
Thank you for calling me out on that. And so I would like to have the board just do a sort of a motion to close this point of discussion out. So would somebody be willing to make a motion that we support the applicants, and make sure I get this right, applicants' presentation of the GOP subject to the addition of
A clear subdivision of the farmland property with meets and bounds.
Okay.
I second that.
Okay. We'll start with Marnie.
Aye, I agree.
Bill?
Aye.
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Richard Bohr?
Aye.
And Rick Mitchell, aye. Okay, good. We're making great progress tonight. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Patrick has something he'd like to say.
I do think there were a number of individuals that did want to have some input regarding the GPOD. A person named Elizabeth Ransom, I know, has been tracking the GPOD language. She did submit something to the planning board. You have it in your package.
Now you tell us.
I've provided that was received today.
And which one
It's
is?
about the middle of the package. It's ransom memo to John Cole
Yes,
from.
I read that.
Okay.
I don't know if others have read it.
If she is in attendance, Pat, if you could allow her to speak, it would be useful.
Who is it I'm looking for?
Elizabeth Ransom.
Hold on, Elizabeth, we're going to connect with you.
Logistical question. This is the one that has ransom and blue on top?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes.
Is she on?
I'm on, I think.
Yes, you are. We can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And I still have Jill's eligibility and compliance screen on, which is probably not the topic at the moment. But just by way of introduction, my name is Elizabeth Ransom. I'm a professional geologist. I've been in the environmental consulting world for, I guess, over 30 years at this point. And the firm I represent, Ransom Consulting, was founded in Newburyport in 1988, and we are 5 offices across New England and the Mid-Atlantic. In our typical project, we represent actually quite a few developers and usually work in the realm of looking at water supply, looking at site development, and site permitting, much like what Jill Mann is representing for this client. As a preface to this, you might wonder, well, why is somebody who would typically be doing commercial development or water supply work working on behalf of a group of local developers? I don't know John Cole. I don't even know the 2,000 people in the group that he represents. But there are times when a project comes across, in my experience, that as currently conceived, it needs work to get to a point where it doesn't have impact. And so my role in looking at this project has been to take a look at the development as it's currently proposed and look at ways in which I can help the town improve upon what's being proposed. Because a lot of my work over the past 30 years has been, in fact, on behalf of municipalities. So it's not my role as a scientist to interpret whether the GPOD itself is an applicable regulation. But should that GPOD apply or not, the purpose of a groundwater protection overlay district is to do just that. It's to protect the groundwater. And so I think what you heard from Mr. Thompson earlier this evening, as well as some of the things we looked at during our review, is that you have several groundwater resources in town that are not only providing groundwater to the citizens of Hamilton, but also to neighboring towns as well. And so as a planning board, part of your role is to provide the town a review board that makes sure that all the town regulations and town interests are being protected, so that 5 years from now, a year from now, month from this development taking place, or 10 years from this development taking place, you've got a record that shows you've done your due diligence and have assurances that this development is not going to harm anybody's groundwater resource. And so typically, in my experience, what we've seen is that boards require a developer to demonstrate that. So you can't just kind of take what a consultant's saying on their face value. You have to say, all right, well, you know, can I have a study that shows that? Can my third-party reviewer review what you've provided and make sure that it's correct? So I think Mr. Thompson referenced that that he'd like to see monitoring wells to, ensure that going forward you have a way to see that these groundwater resources aren't impacted. But you also need the data in advance to show that you have a reasonable study that said, well, this isn't likely to cause an impact, and here's why. And so how do you know that that septic field isn't going to impact the pond that provides water to the farm? How do you know that when you take all that blasted rock out of there, that in blasting, you haven't changed the aquifer properties in such a way that that recharge area no longer functions the way it does currently? So that's where, when we look at this project, we say there are ways in which the planning board can use the tools that they have to cause the developer to give you those pieces of information. Remember, development, it's incumbent upon the developer to show burden of proof that they've done their homework, and that you're not going to affect the town resources. And it's the planning board who needs to make sure that should something come up down the road, should Manchester or a homeowner or somebody who depends on that water supply come to you later and say, hey, we have an issue here, the nitrogen levels have changed, there's a change in our water quality, we think this development's responsible. You as a town are protected and have the ability to push back and say, well, we did our due diligence and we don't think it's coming from this property. So part of my input, I guess, to this project has been to review the materials and, figure out whether or not the developer has actually provided that yet. And, what I've seen so far is that, while the plans are there, some of the background studies that we would typically see requested of us and the work that we've done, it's just not there. So, my suggestion here would be that, that there are opportunities for, not only discussion amongst council as to whether or not GPOD applies, but also for the board to think about what's the intent of that, and are we really protecting the groundwater resources, that whether GPOD applies or not, it's my interpretation of your regulations that you as a board have a responsibility to the town to uphold. And I think that, even if you do as suggested, in terms of chopping off the farmland lot and making that its own lot, it's not necessarily going toward the ultimate goal of groundwater protection. In fact, it might be going the opposite direction. So I think, I'm not an attorney, I'm an environmental scientist, I'm a geologist. But my interpretation of what I see before me in the plans is that you don't yet have the details you need as a board to know that you're protecting the town's resources, and that you would typically, in my experience, be asking the applicant to provide you that information so that you have that available in the future, because if you don't, you've got a risk of third-party claim down the road. I mean, if I'm, let's take the septic system as an example. If you've got that septic system, it's not far from the pond that is used for the agricultural development. And if that pond in a few years from development starts to show issues with phosphorus or nitrogen or things that might, cause an algal bloom as a result of the increased loading, what does the town have to say, well, no, I think that's just natural causes? You don't have the data set yet that allows you to say this is just natural causes.
So I don't want to cut you off, but we want to focus on where we are now. You've raised a number of issues that the board has yet to get to, and we intend to, but I want, again, we're trying to maintain an efficient, clear flow so both the board and the public know what we're focused on, and that was inclusionary zoning and the GPOD. So if you have remarks that are specific to that, that would be great. We'd love to hear them, but I want to avoid, a wide-ranging topic discussion when we're not there yet.
I think if we're talking solely about the GPOD, and we have a continuance of the topic of GPOD, that I would say we have things that apply. And I think I don't have anything to say about the Affordable Housing Act. That's not my subject matter. But I think if we're talking about groundwater protection, that's very much what I am talking about. And I guess, I would I guess defer to Deb as to whether or not, from a legal perspective, we're all talking about the same topic, because I feel like even if you're sectioning off this lot in your regulatory framework, I believe the board does have jurisdiction for ensuring that the groundwater resources is protected.
I have to just say, I agree with you. This is a bit off topic. We are going to provide all that information in another hearing, because we do have an obligation to protect groundwater, and it's stated within the confines of senior housing. This had nothing to do with that. This was a legal interpretation solely. I mean, everything you mentioned, Title V compliance, stormwater compliance, hydrology analysis, impact. We even provided a letter from Manchester Water Department saying they have absolutely no concern relative to the location of our septic or our development or our plans, because we're so far away from what their well is. And I believe I even included that in our original application. But with regard to what Ms. Ransom is noting, we have yet to provide all that information, and that was going to be part of the last discussion item, which was what we're going to do for the next meeting, which we're going to provide you with our, I think I might have said at the beginning, our peer reviewer who actually does do that, who actually talks about monitoring wells, that whole process. We have it. We just are trying to do things in a measured way, because there's so much distraction that if we don't, it just kind of continues to cycle. So we are going to address your concerns, Ms. Ransom, and the concerns that are brought up, because many of them are reasonable and many of them are readily answerable, as you noted. And I think the board deserves those answers and is going to get them in a very clear, precise format at the following hearings. Thank you.
So Jill, I mean, just real quickly, I mean, do you have groundwater monitoring data and a hydrogeologic study from the site beyond like septic system design?
We have some stuff that we're collecting now. Yeah, I don't know the exact details about like what you mean by testing. We have testing, we have a plan, We have things, yes, and we have proposals. I mean, it's hard to test something when it's raw. You don't test a raw piece of land other than doing deep holes, doing assessment of soils, doing assessment of locations of certain things, groundwater, I mean, those types of things. But monitoring wells, et cetera, put in when you're doing work. I mean, so I'm not sure exactly what you mean. But yeah, we have stormwater analysis. A stormwater plan was generated and delivered. And the septic system was actually generated and delivered, and there's a compliance with Title V. And when a board approves a plan that's permitted pursuant to Title V, and that particular septic system is located more than 250 feet away from that water source that's on another property, you comply with Title V. So the board is protected. There is no liability to a town. That's considered your sufficient due diligence by compliance with regulations. So, I mean, with regard to that, I don't know that you've seen all that. But it will be there. It'll be available for review. But it's not this discussion tonight.
Yeah, Patrick?
Mr. Chair, I have received a couple of emails from residents who are concerned that the board has taken some votes without public comment.
Okay.
That being said, let me request that we have the attorney for Chabaco Woods, Deborah Eliason.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and board members. For the record, Deborah Ellison, Ellison Law Office, 63 Middle Street, Gloucester. I have to strongly object, Mr. Chairman, that this meeting has been held entirely, and it's not a meeting, it's a public hearing, has been held entirely without public comment. There were comments that I was prepared to discuss with regard to the inclusionary zoning, comments I was prepared to discuss with regard to the GPOD. And the board had an entire discussion and took votes without allowing any members of the public to be part of that. So I do strongly object to this process. I think there needs to be a better way of handling these hearings. I understand that Zoom is difficult, but the public needs to be acknowledged and needs to be able to actively participate. We have not been able to actively participate tonight at all in any of this discussion until now, which is after the fact. You've already taken your votes. I could ask you to reconsider, but you've already taken your vote. So you would be paying me lip service at this point. So it really is a detriment to the public's active participation in this process if it continues this way. I would suggest that in the future, each segment that is being discussed be discussed independently. And after the applicant has been able to give her presentation and the board members have asked their questions, that the public be able to ask their own questions. Otherwise, the process is not fair. And I think it certainly opens it up to challenge, and I think it opens the votes that we're taking tonight up to challenge. It is just a process that needs to be followed. It's a public hearing process, as I said, and I think that it's very important that you adhere to those rules. There are a few things I would like to mention with regard to senior housing, which I don't believe you've taken a vote yet, that they've met all the bylaw requirements. So I would like to address that. The first purpose under 8.2.1 says to permit the development of moderately priced, affordable, and market rate housing for elderly persons. Attorney Mann talked about meeting all of those purposes, but she never mentioned that it has to be affordable, that there have to be moderately priced. None of that was addressed by her. The ZBL requires it. So what you have in front of you, however, are luxury units, $800,000 list prices, and those are not the sale prices. They'll be a lot higher than that. They're all the same. They're all 2,000 square feet, 2 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. The median price in Hamilton is $682,000. So the condos are even higher. They're $836,000, and that's largely due to Canterbrook and Patton Ridge. So even if they're offered at a lower price, you know the prices are going to be higher than that. So where are the moderately priced unit? Where are the affordable units? None of that is included, and that's the first purpose that is in your ordinance. And then you look at the required findings that need to be made. And regardless of whether the GPOD applies, you still have to make the same findings. There has to be hydrological and hydrogeological studies. And Ms. Mann talking about just doing borings here and there have to be studies presented to you so that you are able to make these decisions in a reasoned manner and with the appropriate data. So far, all we've heard are representations from the applicant, statements from the applicant. We haven't received the data. We haven't seen the 3D entrance. We thought we were going to see that tonight. We haven't seen any of the peer reviews, which was also promised at the last meeting, that they would have comments on the peer reviews. That hasn't happened. So I would suggest to you that there's a long way to go. And as we do this, you need to make sure that the public has an ability to express their opinions so that you can make a reasoned determination, including all sides of the discussion. So I would also suggest that so far, what you have done is you've asked the applicant to tell you what they would like to discuss the next week. I would suggest that that's for the board to decide. And when we began this, the board suggested that they were going to go through each section of the bylaw, of the senior bylaw, and talk about that at each meeting. And everybody would have an opportunity to go through and discuss it. But that hasn't happened. We've had a broad overview of the requirements under the senior housing bylaw, but no detailed discussion. The public hasn't had an opportunity to provide its detailed comments on those. So I'm just a bit disappointed as the way things were handled this evening, and I think that the process going forward needs to be much better than it was tonight. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and board members.
If I may just point of reference, the two matters, Mr. Mitchell and Attorney Elias, were interpretive. They weren't decision-making, and that does not require public input. It is about the board's discussion. At no point in time did they exercise any of their discretionary rights or go through any of the findings without seeking public opinion. So I disagree vehemently with regard to whether or not there was a deprivation. It was simply an attempt to get the board's interpretive abilities out. With regard to the amount of the affordable formula, that is something that they actually are seeking town council input on and is going to be brought back. But the other two matters are purely not discretionary. They were simply interpreted by the board. And with regard to the other findings in moderate and low, I think I've made it abundantly clear, you can't have low and moderate housing and senior housing under the bylaw. So that's why there's a payment in lieu. And that's how you provide that element of low and moderate. I know it's not the norm, but that's the way senior housing works. That's the way it works in the town of Hamilton. That's the way it is with 55 and over. But we have not made any of the findings, nor have we provided sufficient information, to your point. I mean, we still have to provide. And by the way, that 3D rendering was never going to be presented this evening because that takes a tremendous amount of work to generate, which I think, Mr. Poore knows. And we continue to work on it, and we need to provide that at least 1 week in advance of the meeting so it can be properly disseminated to the board. Right. And that will be at the next meeting, I promise you, and everybody will have the opportunity to look at it, as well as the information relative to the hydrology, the geology. I mean, we are still trying to refine certain aspects of the site that are impacted, and that's why it's taking a bit of time to do that and to get the peer responses out. And we're doing it in a fashion that is more segmented because, quite frankly, there's a lot of red herrings. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of, personal opinions, and it's tough to manage. I mean, that's all. It's just tough to manage. So this is the best way to do it. And I think that this board is going to be exceptionally mindful with regard to your comments. Everybody keeps sending them in via email as well. We have your letter too. So, that's about it. I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
And through you, Mr. Chairman.
Let me chime in and say thank you for your comments. And it's always good to remind the board that public participation is important throughout this process, so I will commit to be much better about soliciting public input, but I do agree that we were interpretive rather than making definitive decisions. And also, your letter of September 20th that outlines much of what you were alluding to was provided to all board members, and I have personally read it. So we did have the benefit of your input and on GPOD, as well as the inclusionary housing bylaw, as well as on the cap of number of units and prior decisions precedent. So we didn't ignore your comments, but I agree that we need to continue to be mindful of public participation.
And Mr. Chairman, if I might respond, interpretive does not determine whether or not there is public input. And I would argue or suggest to you that you did hear from the applicant's attorney. And so it would have been appropriate to also allow members of the public to weigh in on that. If you're going to listen to someone else, a third party, when you make your decision on how you interpret a statute or an ordinance bylaw, then you need to take public comment on that. And so I would strongly request that this board be mindful of the public's interest in this matter, which of course you know, and merely having documents presented to the board without having the ability to speak to the board and answer any questions by the board is really not the same. And the public was not given the same courtesy as the applicant was given tonight. Thank you.
And I've acknowledged such. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman, Mr. Chairman.
Another individual, Lewis Brown, would like to comment on yield calculations.
I think Lewis, you are on. No, we've got Elizabeth Ransom.
Yes, accept my promotion.
This is Louis Brown. I'm all set, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lewis. Patrick, do we have others that have indicated they would like to talk?
Larry Smith actually would like to say a few words.
I think he's already a panelist, yeah. Should be able to speak.
I'm good, Patrick.
Okay.
I was just here in case my input was needed during the hearing, but I think Ms. Mann and our engineers did a wonderful job. So I don't have anything else to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. John Cole.
Sure.
John, you're on.
Great. I had no comments at that point, Patrick. Those notes were just to make sure that we did get public comment. Okay. And now we're open and getting public comment. I'm happy with that. So
Okay, thank you, John.
Thank you, John. Heather Insworth.
Heather, we're coming.
Heather.
Heather. I'll just look for Heather's letters. Yeah. Sure if Heather is
she still there?
She just needs to unmute herself. There you go. Okay.
No need to comment. I agree with John. I just wanted some public input. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Heather.
So So Nancy has her hand up.
Who?
Nancy Peterson?
Nancy Peterson, okay. We're trying to connect with Nancy, so.
She can talk.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. My comment was, Ms. Mann said at the very beginning that the property will be developed no matter what. And I would like to understand why that is the case. Why could the property not be conserved?
Jill, do you want to answer that question?
Sure, because the property owner wants to develop the land and it's their property, and pursuant to the zoning regulations, they're entitled to do so.
Yeah, may I speak further?
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying she's making a definitive statement that the property will be developed, but that is not, I mean, it can be conserved. I think it's important to make that distinction.
There's a vast difference between conserved and used, and I recognize that, but in order for it to be conserved, somebody's going to have to pay them the value of the land, and nobody has done so. And currently, they're under agreement to develop the property, and the Riches have indicated that that is something they want to do, and it is their property, and they have the legal entitlement to do that. And they even have some by right uses of the property, so it will be developed.
Jill, I think
It will be conserved, but it will be developed.
Jill, I think all maybe this point is making is we should all be careful about the language you're using in a forum such as this. It's a proposed development, and it's a proposal until a board has voted it as a sure thing. And
well,
so,
Elizabeth, I never said that this was going to happen. I simply said it will be developed. There is no need to mince words. There's a by right use of the development. That was exactly what I said. This is why the tangent arguments, I don't know how to address it other than I really wanted to respond to Ms. Peterson because she asked a legitimate question. I cannot tell you that this planning board will approve a special permit. It is within their total purview to approve or deny the project. That is their right. But I can tell you that subdivision approval, if they comply with all of the regulations, is a by right permit.
Mr. Chairman, if I may just address that one issue.
Go ahead.
The conventional plan that the applicant has shown is one that I think they're using to make the public concerned that there will be a 32-unit development there. When we were at the Conservation Commission, they said that there was one place on this property where the septic system could be, and that was where they are locating it. So it, I think, would be awfully difficult for them, if that is in fact true, for them to locate 32 septic systems so that each lot could have a septic system.
A conventional subdivision doesn't require that.
It doesn't require a way to dispose of your waste?
You can do one system under Title V.
And the plan that was shown, however, did not show that there would be one system. It in fact showed lots where the system is located. So I think there are a lot of things that are shown on that plan that are exaggerated, and I just wanted to make that comment.
And again, the plan is not intended to do anything of the sort. We were asked to provide what a conventional plan was. That layout in the roadway complies with the requirements of subdivision control. With regard to Title V, we can make the system work by putting in one single system. Again, we're going off a tangent. There's no requirement in this town to do that. We simply show it because you need to provide people with an understanding that the land can be developed. We're trying to do it in a meaningful way. Again, we couldn't be more willing and more transparent to do it in a meaningful way. We are going to do everything in our power to provide the information that's legitimate and that will answer the reasonable concerns of abutters. There is no doubt about that, to the point of what Ms. Ransom had raised. I mean, we will respond. We will. We will ensure that the title system complies with Title V. We will ensure that the stormwater management systems comply with stormwater management policies. We will ensure that the development and any touches of anything even near the wetland will comply with the local bylaw as well as the Wetland Protection Act. And we will ensure that we honor, the purposes of the senior housing bylaw. I mean, that's our intent. It's pretty clear what our intent is. I think the plan is pretty compelling.
Okay, do we have more questions?
Seems like we have another raised hand.
Say that again?
Kathy Rich Duvall has raised her hand.
Kathy Rich has raised her hand.
Excuse me.
One moment while we connect.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can,
Yes.
and we can see
Okay.
you.
So I'm Kathy Rich Duval, and I am one of the owners of 133 Essex Street. And I just want to go on record because there are some people that have asked some questions and, about developing the land, preserving the land. So for those of you who don't know the history behind the land is that over 60 years ago, my father and my mother bought 2 parcels in Hamilton. One they developed and one they kept for the special purpose. And this is the land that was the special purpose. And they kept this for a very long time. We've paid $1 zillion in taxes to develop this land, okay? And the land will be developed. Ms. Mann is very, very correct in that. My brothers and I have that intention. We want to honor my parents' wishes. We've kept it for a long time. Originally, my dad wanted to do something with seniors. He looked into senior assisted living and so forth, but this is a perfect vision that my brothers and I have, really want to see happen. Since their passing, my brothers and I have met with lots of different groups and companies, large and small, to develop the land. But this was the vision that we have chosen, that we really want. Larry and Jill and Julia and Restoration Capital and the Tobacco Hill partners and so forth, they've come up with a great plan that we support. I'm on all these meetings because I am incredibly supportive of this. And, this is what we want, okay? That we have been, we've been good taxpayers and good neighbors. This is just something that we want. We are going to develop the land, and it's just a given. All right, so I'm going to be on every one of these calls that I can possibly be on, and I'm happy to comment. But this is something that the land will be developed. We would love this project to go through, and that's just a matter of facts, okay? And I'm sorry that people are upset about this, but this is just something that we are going to do and we're going to continue to pursue. That's all I have to say. Thank you to the chair and to the board for listening.
All right, thank you.
There's a Q&A we can read.
Yes, let's go through the Q&A and
Do you want me to read them?
yeah, can you?
Dear members of Planning Committee, will you please enter copies of both the questions and responses into the record? I suppose that's the minutes. It's recorded.
This session is recorded and will be preserved, so it will all be preserved.
Okay. This is also Jim. I've noted in past meetings, due to characteristics of Zoom meetings without the benefit of public forum, the Q&A section of the Zoom meeting can be the only opportunity for the record, public comment preserved for the record. It's probably the same type of question here. think it's a comment more than anything.
Okay, you want to keep going?
Yep, if the board requires groundwater monitoring in the recharge area, as the town's consultant, Mr. Thompson, recommends to provide an early warning of sewage pollution in Beck's Pond, how will that be enforced and funded? Who will be responsible for paying this, and how does it work, and how does it define in the project submission?
Let me just make a comment relative to that. Mr. Thompson is a private resident. He is a professional engineer, has worked for Haley and Aldrich for many years as in various capacities, also as a vice president. He's engaged in a lot of town kinds of efforts, particularly those relative to engineering tasks. He has a real capability regarding groundwater, those kinds of things. So he's been assisting the town and the board in those areas. So he's not a town consultant. We do have a consultant as part of our peer engineering group. They're Tata and Howard. They will be providing information, actually already have. And once we get to that focus area as part of the overall board's deliberations and discussions with the developer, we'll bring those forward. But as we said up front in the meeting, what we're trying to do is focus on specific areas so the board, the applicant, and the public can best focus our energies and thoughts to constructive ends.
So I think the answer to that question is we're not there yet, but that's a question that David did bring up and will be part of the discussion when we get into talking about hydrological concerns and septic systems. So it will be a future topic of discussion. And I think we've already talked about the conclusion about being developed. The owners have stated that they intend one way or the other for the property to be developed. Okay, if I can read this now, I think if the goal is to provide affordable housing, why would the affordable housing payment be for dwelling unit that only serves two-person households, not four-person household? Because that's how it is defined in our regulations, and that's how the planning board has interpreted and actually practiced this in previous developments. Shouldn't the household number of people who are living in the household side be triggered by the square footage of the dwelling units being built by the developer? No, that's not how it's calculated. So that's the answer to that question. There should be an opportunity for the members of the public to comment on this issue because you're not getting the entire picture. I'm not sure which issue, but we are mindful that we need to be doing a better job of, as we go through each of these units, to stop and solicit public input. So Ms. Mann's conflation of the number of bedrooms in a home with the number of persons in the households is critical in her calculation of the amount of the payment in lieu of affordable dwelling units. This seems to imply as intended occupancy limited based on one person per bedroom. Mass Department of Housing and Community Development generally seems to consider two persons per bedroom when discussing affordable housing use. Is this intention of the planning board to accept a calculation based on a two-person household? Yes, at this point in time it is. Public comment should be allowed before the board makes a decision. I absolutely agree. A resident of Manchester, I'd like to copy this letter from Manchester DPW. The file should be available on the town website for review. Well, if this person would like to identify themselves to Patrick Reffett, who's the Director of Planning in the town of Hamilton, we can certainly send that letter from the Manchester DPW directly to you. And it is part of the record. Would you take a vote before I allow public input? It feels like we've been held ransom watching infighting between committee members. Was this supposed to be a public hearing? When Mr. Ransom was finally able to question Ms. Mann could not even factually list any studies or tests that have been done. She gave a lot of lip service, but has nothing factual to back up what they are saying. Well, I think, as was discussed, we were talking about affordable housing, the inclusionary housing bylaw and GPOD, the interpretation. We have not gotten to the technical details of how this development is going to be built, and septic and groundwater protection and stormwater and all the other things that are important to determine whether this project are viable. Going forward, what will the process planning board to provide public input? Well, I think we've heard loud and clear that we need to do a better job. So we got that message. It seems that you hold board making decisions based on what Attorney Mann's interpretation of the regulations are. She certainly has strong self-interest, not at the interest of the town. Well, she certainly does, but the 7-member elected planning board has strong interest in protecting the town, as we're all residents of this town. And we also are held accountable to the bylaws that the citizens of the town have approved. And so that's where the rubber meets the road, is we seek guidance from those bylaws and try and work within the bounds of those bylaws and interpret them to the best of our ability. Could I ask a question of the board? Certainly, Nancy, I think you already had that opportunity. Why develop a property when your neighbors are so interested in conserving it? I think we've already answered that question. The Riches have said specifically they are going to develop the property one way or the other. The understanding of the environmental impact of over 60 years ago is very different than it is today. How can you ensure that the water supply will not be damaged for future generations? That's an excellent question, and one we will get to in, I'm sure, great detail in future meetings. Isn't it the town's determination as to whether the land can be developed or not due to issue related to protecting the town's needed resources, such as protecting the watershed area as opposed to the owner? Yes, and that will be the nexus of this whole discussion in future meetings, is to determine if the project, in fact, can be built, and if so, what are the protections, what are the guidelines, what's the information, how are we as citizens of the town going to be protected? So those will be up for a lot of intense, very detailed discussions that are coming in the future. Again, we're just at the beginning of this entire process. This is not a sprint, this is a marathon. So we're going to get into a lot more detail on a lot of these subjects. Isn't it the town's determination as to whether the land can be developed? Oh, and wait a minute, I think I already read that. Yes, I think I answered that. Is that the last question?
That is the last question.
Okay. So, thank you to all. Yes, it was a spirited discussion, and it should be. These are very important subjects. Some members of the board will disagree, but we do so respectfully, and we hope we can have the same level of discussion with the public. I make a commitment to being better about including the public in some of these much more important and very thoughtful discussions that we'll be having. So with that, unless anybody else on the board has any comments to make, then I'd like to Patrick has something to say.
I'm just making a request that we put together a manageable list of topics for our next meeting.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. So, I think the applicant had indicated that we were going to be talking about groundwater next, but I don't know if Jill is still with us.
Yeah.
Is that in fact the case? Are you ready? What topics are you ready to present to the board?
Sure. So the next topic, I think that, I don't know if the board wants to discuss it tonight, the final development aspect, with the 50 units, the density aspect, or put that until the next meeting. And then at the next meeting, we will be discussing, the location of the septic system. We'll be discussing the groundwater issues, in terms of, we do have some geological information that we want to present to the board. And basically the view, we're trying to work on that the 3D rendering, that modeling for the entrance point. So we're hopeful to be able to deliver that to the board as well at the next meeting. And that's it. And then, one other thing that Mr. Poor had asked for is we did place the trails on a map, and now what we're trying to do is show that connection where we have it going. Because one of the issues was, is it possible to ensure that you can get on the trail and then loop around and stay on the property on a trail? And that's just the final thing that we're trying to wrap up. So those types of things. I mean, I guess I would ask if it would be possible for Patrick to maybe send around to me what he thinks to be a good next agenda, and then we can distribute it to all parties and we can get that finalized and then published before the next meeting.
Yeah, and I would ask, once we finalize the agenda, and Patrick's already alluded to this, that both for the public, if they have comments or topics relevant to these, or comments that relevant to these topics that we've discussed, and Jill as well, that the board get these at least a week in advance so that we have time to thoughtfully read and digest the information and come prepared to have an informed, intelligent discussion.
That'd be perfect.
Okay. Jonathan.
I have one or two actual small requests regarding the materials that you're preparing for upcoming meetings. It doesn't necessarily need to be for the next one, but upcoming. And that is just some clarifications on your site sections. And I don't remember the letters, but the site section that comes up through the entry drive, maybe that's C, I forget which one it is. If you could indicate the revised plantings that you proposed, you submitted a revised landscape plan. If you could update it with the revised plantings that you propose at the entrance.
Yep.
That's one. And then the second is, I'm pleased at the direction that you've taken that section, and what would be very useful is to show the top of embankment, the 2-to-1 embankment, as it shows up in that section behind those units. It can just be a line. It's pretty easy to do. Is that clear, or do I need to clarify that?
Top of embankment, and show behind the units where there's like the 2-foot, is it the 2-foot slopes?
Yeah, the 2-to-1 slopes, yes.
2-to-1, I meant, I apologize.
Yes, the top of that.
It's getting late.
Yes, the top of that embankment, which actually that line represents the limit of disturbance.
Yep, I think I understand it.
Yeah, and the elevation of that limit of disturbance as it shows up in that section would be very useful.
Okay.
And thank you for providing the information so far.
Most certainly.
Is it a contour line you're referring to?
Yes, it's a contour. It's not a contour line, actually. No, it's not a contour line. It's running across the contour lines. It represents the top of the bank. It's very easy to plot. I've done it myself on your section, but it would be better if you produced it.
I think I understand what you mean, because we have talked about it. So I think we can get that. And Jeff and Brent hear you, and they're the ones that produce the cross-section. So I'm sure we can accomplish that, Mr. Porter. If I have a question, I'll go through Patrick and have it relayed to you, and then we'll get clarification if necessary.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any comment? Marnie? Pat?
John mentioned the landscape architecture plan that was recently submitted, maybe having a review or putting that on the agenda for discussion. And I don't know when the third-party engineers' comments will be addressed or presented, but if they were available, that might be relevant.
Yeah, most of their work so far has been traffic analyses, review of what was submitted. Also, we have gotten some groundwater information. We've gotten some blasting information. I've been holding on to those in hopes that we could get some of these other earlier things out of the way, but happy to get those things sent out to folks if you think that we're ready for them.
Sent out to whose folks? What? Are you saying that the third-party reviewer has evaluated the applicant's technical information on groundwater, on blasting?
On groundwater, blasting, civil engineering.
I'd actually, my personal preference, and the board may disagree, is we ought to wait until we're approaching that subject, because I don't want information overload. I want it to be timely and relevant to what we're discussing. You know, people feel comfortable with that?
Yes, I think that's a good plan. Otherwise, it gets stored somewhere. And
right. We'll just
later.
It'll be too much for us to actually absorb and come back with a thoughtful response. But go ahead, Jonathan.
I have a little different opinion about that, but I defer to the board. But what I find is all of these pieces of information tend to be intertwined and they relate to each other. And it's very helpful for me personally to have as much information, as much data as I can. It does not overwhelm, it actually informs and makes a more cohesive picture. And I would encourage things to be shared as they come in. So that's a very different viewpoint there.
Marnie?
I don't have an opinion either way, because to the extent we don't get to a topic, I keep the information that I have, and I read it when it comes in, and again, it's, if I have it and it's not discussed, it's in a file, and if it's pertinent to something that we're discussing, I'll read it. I generally skim through everything when I get it anyway, so.
Here's a way maybe to meet both interests. What Patrick has done nicely, like for this meeting, is said, here are some things that I've received. They're not pertinent for tonight, but I'm sharing them for the future. So if they could be positioned that way, folks who need them to inform the bigger picture would have them well in advance to do their analysis, and folks who would be feel overwhelmed by them can just set them aside with Patrick's direction.
Which I think actually is going to result in duplication, because human nature is they'll come in and you'll go, well, I don't want to read that until I'm the subject. So Patrick will probably end up having to resend that information when the topic comes up.
Thank Kevin for Outlook.
I do think the agenda for next week, if all the items that I just jotted down are discussed, I'm thinking maybe midnight. So we might want to narrow things down, because I have location of septic, groundwater, geologic information, 3D rendering, trails, and density. And
I agree. I agree.
I think we have to limit our
because
topics to one or two.
I agree, because if we're going to have an informed board discussion and to have the public involved in discussing these, then I think it's slower and less topics is better
Right,
for
and
all of us.
Unless the septic system is approved by the Board of Health.
It is.
Oh, it has been?
Well, no. I'm sorry. That's not what I meant. They have governing authority.
Right, they do, but I don't think they've made a determination yet.
No,
So that's what I'm saying. That's
Okay,
something
got
that
it,
may
got it.
not be determined next week.
Right.
We'll wait to hear from the Board of Health, and then
So
we can address
are you
it.
saying we should postpone that?
Yeah, well, I'm giving an example of a
No,
topic.
no, I'm
that-
just,
Yeah,
I'm
and
looking
the-
for your recommendations.
Yeah, so I would take that off the table for next week. And the groundwater and the geologic information, they're probably.
That's one whole meeting.
That's one whole meeting, maybe two,
Yeah.
maybe three.
It seems like we're mixing information here. What I think we're
We're what?
talking about is receiving paperwork from Patrick.
Well,
but
what
not
we're talking
discussing it.
about now is the agenda for the next meeting.
Right.
So,
These were the topics that were mentioned.
Understood.
And I think it's way too ambitious, so.
Absolutely understood. And so what I think the question was initially was, should Patrick hold information or share information as he receives it?
well, I think the answer was Patrick will send it out, and certain people will read it, skim it, integrate it, and other people will set it aside until the topic becomes up for discussion.
So the answer is he will be sharing it, not holding it.
I think so.
Yeah.
Thank you. I didn't understand that.
But I don't know if it's premature even to consider the groundwater and the geological information.
Yeah, and that's where the applicant comes back in. Jill, what are you prepared to talk to discuss in detail, where you have all the information you need, and we've had peer review of that information so that we can have a robust discussion?
So I think I need more time to formulate that list, because when you issued the, not you, I apologize, when your peer reviewer issued its comment letter, we've actually been working on those responses, and there will be certain elements of that that need to get fleshed out and talked about. But once we resolve, it's best to do that and then have the issue come up before the board and to discuss it. So I think Ms. Crouch's point is well taken. We need to kind of tailor the agenda items, because it needs to be profitable conversation. Because once you get to a certain time in the night, you're tired. And I get that. Everybody is up early and it's a late night. So it would be,
we're there
for
now.
example, it would be density. It would be a review, I would hope, of town council's letter relative to the affordable housing formula. It would be the 3D renderings, and it would be the cross sections. So the viewscape comments. And the only reason I brought up the septic is because everybody keeps bringing up these concerns that the septic system is going to contaminate groundwater. And that's what Title V does. Once you build a compliant system, you don't contaminate groundwater unless you don't build it properly and there are controls in place. So that's why I kind of brought up that. And there's not much to a septic system other than compliance with Title V. As far as the geologic and groundwater, if you think that you would like one independent meeting, I think then it probably either should be the next one or the one following it. I mean, I'm trying to decide which, because I need to get you the information at least a week ahead of time.
Yeah. So, all right, so I think we can agree on the interpretation, the 50 unit discussion.
Yep.
That's an relatively easy discussion to have. The septic, you certainly could present, but I think it's going to get into there's going to be more questions about the groundwater and what Dave Thompson brought up. And so that almost, I think, goes with talking about septic. And you certainly can make the presentation and said, once we've got a Title V compliant system, sort of end of discussion, but I think they're interrelated with, okay, what are the things that we might require in terms of monitoring that system to ensure that it doesn't contaminate groundwater. So
I think that's the Board of Health more than anything.
Yeah, but I know the board is going to want to at least explore that, and you may truncate that, but it will be a topic of discussion if I'm reading the board correctly.
Understood.
So I'm thinking septic and groundwater are going to go together because I think they're related.
And the geological information.
And the geological information.
Yeah,
Is the geological information, the way in which you interpret it, related to the ledge removal and the alteration to the grade of the property? Is that really what you're trying to get at? Because that is that blasting survey and then our consultant's review of that and presentation of a report.
Well, they are interrelated, but I think I'm going to try and draw an arbitrary line, and the board may disagree with me, is to sort of keep septic separate, but mindful of the concern about preventing contamination of the aquifer. So that's a separate discussion, but the blasting, hydrological, and groundwater discussion is the one that could be the marathon, 3-hour discussion, I believe. Does that make sense?
It does. So can you give me the opportunity to discuss it with my consultants? Because I do want to give you a meaningful period of time to review. And I'm assuming, I have to get it out. I mean, that's something, the last thing I want is to get a comment from, for example, Elizabeth Ransom on the night of the hearing about it, because it's very difficult for me to then address it. So I want to be able to get it to you so that she can look at it and provide meaningful comment. So I just need to check with my consultants so that we don't have to have duplicative meetings, because to Ms. Crouch's point, it can be a heady discussion, but if we give people sufficient time to prepare, then the comments are directed, the responses can be done ahead of time, and we can have a very meaningful discussion.
Yeah, I agree. So you're going to kind of drive the timeline there as to when you are prepared to present the materials that have been peer-reviewed, and so we have a meaningful discussion.
Yes, exactly. So if I may, I should be able to get that information, at least an estimate, tomorrow from my consultants, and then I can share that with Patrick, with Mr. Reffett, and then he can share that with you, Mr. Mitchell.
So why don't we, and Marnie, you check on my logic and brain thinking power that's diminishing by the minute, that we deal with the senior housing bylaw limit.
Yep.
Are you prepared to talk about septic and system and protection of the aquifer on that?
Relative to that issue, yes.
Okay, so that's 2. That could be, there might be some minor one that we could talk about, but I'd like to keep it. We could maybe have a third as an option if we have time, but again.
We include the affordable, Mr. Mitchell? So that if we get the opinion of town council, I think that'll be pretty quick.
Yeah, if we have an opinion back by town council, absolutely. But I want to be mindful of allowing public comment and using Zoom. And Pat, this is not any comment on your ability. It's kind of a slow and clunky process, and we want to make sure that the public has time to digest and comment on whatever we're talking about.
To that point, Miss Ransom has had her hand up.
Who?
Miss Ransom has had her hand up through this process.
Oh, okay.
We're still.
Sure. Come on in.
I don't know if she's still hoping to speak.
Miss Ransom, I think we're trying to connect, so hold on.
She had asked a question about sharing that peer review info.
And that's all public information, so, and that's why we're saying we'd like to take this slow and steady, so everybody gets the information with enough time to review it, digest it, and comment on it. But
I did have two comments that I had typed in. I think one I had finished and one I had not quite finished when the things shift over to make me a panelist. So the first one I think you've already answered, which was, can you provide those things in advance? I think you've already answered that you will be doing that. I think that's super helpful. 1 week, depending on the nature of the comments, if you get it a week in advance, it doesn't leave a whole lot of time for somebody else to review it on behalf of the community. So I appreciate that that there might be some additional lead time on that. The other question that that I was kind of putting forward is relative to how do you structure the discussion on the different water resources and septic system versus blasting, and how does that all pertain to and stormwater design. They're all obviously interrelated. I think, keeping in mind that there are really sort of 4 resources that you're trying to protect. One is the town's well and the contribution to the aquifer that supports the town well. There are the ponds and how do things interplay with the nearby ponds and the groundwater resources or potential future groundwater resources that those represent. There are the homeowners who have private wells located nearby the development. And then there is the irrigation pond that is supporting the farmland. And while some of the discussion about the septic system is probably more relevant, in the short term, at least, toward the irrigation pond, both the septic system and the houses themselves and the removal of rock all have an opportunity to impact any and all of the groundwater resources. And so, I think it's helpful to allow a discussion that maybe allows those things to come back and forth a little bit versus trying to section off and say, let's just take that septic system out separately and discuss it on its own. And so, I certainly welcome any information that Jill Mann and the consultants representing the developer can provide on any studies they've done. I think there's a distinction between a study that simply shows that you meet Title V for percolation versus something that shows what happens over the long term when you change the site conditions. Because right now, what you're able to say is this is what exists here in the present, and what you're trying to also ascertain is how might things look down the road when a development's been in place for a while. That being said, just kind of in terms of helping structure how do we go forward with future discussions, I certainly like to suggest keeping any of those sort of groundwater resources grouped together in our discussions as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. So I think we have an agenda for the next meeting. Jill, are you clear on it?
I am.
Board members, okay?
Yep.
All right. So with that in mind, I'd like to, and Patrick, do I need to take a vote to continue this?
Yes, sir, you do.
Okay, so I'd like somebody to make a motion, continue the special permits senior housing for 133 Essex to our next meeting, which will be on what date, Patrick?
That will be October the 5th.
Till October the 5th. That's good.
Oh boy,
5th.
oh boy, it is the 5th, right? Okay. I just have, okay, I'll just have to work it out. I just have conflicts. I have a public hearing opening that night, and I didn't realize it was going to be continued to that date. Okay.
So you're good?
No, I'm not, but I mean, I'll try and figure it out.
I get it. All right.
What she needs to do is get her clone activated. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so.
It's just more of the same, right?
I'll entertain a motion to continue the hearing, special permit senior housing for 133 Essex.
I move that we continue the hearing for the senior housing development permit at 133 Essex Street.
I second.
All those in favor?
Richard Boroff, aye.
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Marnie?
Aye. Marty Crouch, aye.
Rick Mitchell, aye. Okay, that hearing is closed closed and continued until our next meeting on October 5th.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Patrick, we will be speaking.
Okay, so we have board business. As you can tell, I'm disassembling as we speak. Discuss upcoming schedule and agenda items. I think we've already done that. Possible special town meeting articles. Patrick, I think the only thing is that they're going to change all the zoning bylaws to conform with the Board of Selectmen's new title, Select Board. Does that
That's
cover
correct. Yeah, that's correct as it stands right now.
All right, so we've covered that. So meeting minutes is the last item on the agenda. Marnie, I'm deferring to you. I think we're on our third iteration of the meeting.
Right. I move that we approve the minutes of the September 7th Planning Board meeting.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Roll call.
Marty Crouch, aye. I don't know if there's any discussion. Did anyone have any changes there?
I have no discussion.
You do?
I do not.
Okay. I was looking at you and I didn't see any discussion ayes.
Yes.
So, okay. Marty Crouch, Bill
Aye.
Wheaton,
I abstain, I wasn't here.
okay.
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Richard Boroff, aye.
Rick Mitchell, aye. Okay, unless anybody has anything else to discuss, I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Can I have a second?
I second.
All right, all those in favor of adjourning, we're going to do this by unanimous vote. Is the,
You just threw my
So
pen
you're getting
me.
back at me
Sorry.
now, huh?
I know, you gave me a
Stab
hard
me with this
time.
unanimous vote?
Yes.
Aye.
Aye, okay, it's unanimous